There is no rooster this morning. Not because the rooster isn't crowing, but because he started before the sun and hasn't stopped since. His scratchy voice filters through the thin wooden walls like a curse you didn't ask for, rhythmic and smug, as if he personally owns the daylight. You try to bargain with the morning by turning onto your side and tucking your knees into the bundle of old straw and wool scraps you've been calling a bed. It doesn't work. The cold has already found its way into the fabric, into the cracks in your knees, into the places between your teeth. You are not asleep anymore. You're simply horizontal and slightly angry. The ceiling above you is low and dark, the rough wood beams stained with years of smoke and damp air. One of them drips. Always the same one. It doesn't matter how dry it was yesterday. Somehow it always knows how to be slightly wet, slightly green, slightly moldy in that very specific and intimate way. You stare at it for a while, as if your gaze could convince it to stop. It doesn't. You can hear the rhythmic shift of something scuttling across the rafters above, soft and small and definitely alive. There's a part of your brain that wants to know what it is, and another part that wants never to know, not in this lifetime or the next. Your blanket, if that's even still an appropriate word for it, has developed corners, not the comforting kind. These are stiff folds that seem to exist just to jab you in the shin when you least expect it. The weight of it is uneven, heavier near your chest, and suspiciously crunchy near your feet. You tell yourself it's just the way the wool has settled over time. You do not investigate further. Some knowledge is better left buried beneath stale linen and damp dreams. The longhouse is still mostly asleep. That is, except for the sounds that never sleep. The shallow breathing of bodies nearby. The scrape of someone's foot dragging across packed earth as they shift under their blanket. The faint whistle of air being sucked through a nose that has never known a clear day. There's a cough, deep and familiar. It echoes off the walls and is immediately followed by silence, the kind that asks, "Are they dead?" and answers, "No, just miserable." Somewhere, someone scratches, loudly, with purpose. You inch your face out from beneath the corner of the blanket, and the morning air bites you like a neighbor who's held a grudge for years. Your nose regrets it immediately. It runs in protest, dribbling cold tears that have nowhere to go. You sniff, loudly enough to offend someone nearby, but not loudly enough to warrant moving. You can smell smoke, yesterday's fire, long dead but still lingering in the air like a sigh. It mixes with the unmistakable aroma of people. Not bad people, just unwashed, unbrushed, overcooked humanity. The smell of living in one room with too many bodies, too little ventilation, and one goat with poor manners. The goat is awake, of course. It always is. You can hear it shifting around in its corner of the longhouse, occasionally butting something wooden for reasons only goats understand. It makes a snorting sound that could mean anything, but most likely means, "Feed me or I'll scream." You pretend not to hear it, just like you pretend not to hear the subtle rustle of your sibling rolling over on the other side of the fire pit, dragging their blanket halfway into the ashes again. That smell, the scorched wool, burnt hair combination, has become strangely comforting, like family. You lie still for a moment longer, just long enough for your leg to cramp in protest. The straw mattress beneath you, which began its life with ambition, has flattened into an uneven mess of stems and despair. You shift your weight and feel the sharp jab of something old and pointed, possibly a twig, possibly the hardened heel of a lost bread crust. You reach down and toss it aside, and it lands with a sound far too heavy for something so small. You don't look. You've learned not to. There is no sunrise to admire, no dramatic spilling of golden light across the hills, no poetic moment where the world seems reborn in morning's embrace. There is only gray, the kind of gray that leaks through warped wooden slats and sullen thatch, casting everything in the color of used dishwater. The light doesn't so much enter the longhouse as seep into it, like moisture finding its way into your bones. Still, it's brighter than it was, which means you're officially out of excuses. You begin the process of peeling yourself out of bed. It's not elegant. One limb at a time, each one reluctant and stiff, as though your body has formed some kind of alliance with the bedding. Your knees pop. Your back sends a polite but firm reminder that it no longer supports ambitious movements. You sit up slowly, swaying for a moment under the weight of your own regret, then reach for the tunic that hangs from the peg above your sleeping spot. It's not warm. It never is. The fabric is cold and smells like the firewood pile, which wouldn't be so bad if the firewood pile didn't also double as a rat hotel. You shake it out, which does nothing, then pull it over your head, embracing the sensation of chilled wool against bare skin. It's itchy, naturally, and clings in all the wrong places. You make a mental note to finally patch the hole near the left armpit. You will not do this. Your feet slide into last year's shoes, if one can call them that. They are more foot-shaped leather ambitions than actual footwear. One sole is separating like a badly made pie crust. The other contains something crunchy that you don't investigate. You stand, wobble slightly, and take your first step into the morning like a newborn deer made of regret and sore muscles. The fire pit is nothing but ash and one stubborn coal that blinks at you like an exhausted eye. You nudge it with a stick, hoping it will revive itself through shame alone. It doesn't. You add some twigs, blow gently, and whisper encouragement through your teeth. Eventually, with more smoke than flame, the beginnings of warmth return, just enough to make your nose run again. Behind you, others begin to stir. A blanket shifts, a throat clears. Someone farts with the quiet confidence of a man who has made peace with himself. The day has begun. You move toward the corner where the water bucket waits. It's never quite full, never quite clean, and never quite as cold as you fear, until your fingers touch it. Then it's worse. You scoop a handful and splash your face, bracing for the slap of liquid frostbite. It hits like betrayal. Your eyes sting, your skin tightens, and for a moment, you genuinely consider lying back down and refusing to exist, but you don't, because the sun is up, and so you have to be too. You towel off with something that might be a rag or a shirt, rough enough to exfoliate memories. It leaves you pink, damp, and slightly humiliated. Your reflection stares back at you from a nearby puddle, pale, puffy, and entirely unconvinced, but alive, which in this village is still something worth noting. The goat sees you and lets out a long, wheezing bleat that sounds like judgment. You nod, acknowledging the hierarchy. You serve her now. The chores will come next. The milking, the feeding, the endless fetching and scraping and lifting and bending and pretending not to notice when the neighbor peeks in, just to say hello, but really to comment on how crooked your woodpile looks. But not yet. For now, you squat beside the fire, elbows on knees, watching the smoke twist upward and vanish into the beams above. Your fingers tingle as they warm. Your stomach growls. Your hair smells like everything in the room, which is to say, smoke, sweat, straw, and goat. You pick at a fleck of ash on your sleeve and try not to think about the day ahead. Just this moment. Just the heat slowly returning to your hands. Just the soft, damp murmur of the waking world. The grunt of someone stretching. The creak of beams above. The faint patter of something leaking. Somewhere. Again. You sit there, half dressed, half awake, half hoping someone else will get up first and do the hardest part. Starting. But they won't. You already know that. And so slowly, with the gravity of all things heavy and unglamorous, you begin the next motion, the next step, the long walk toward whatever today has in store, because the sun is up, and so you have to be too. And soon, too soon, it will be time to leave the warmth of the fire and meet the frozen earth with your hands. You sit for a while longer beside the half-hearted fire, hands extended, palms turned toward the smoke like they're asking for forgiveness. The warmth is reluctant, barely more than a whisper on your skin, the kind that lulls you into imagining it might last, until you shift slightly, and the chill climbs back into your sleeves like a house guest who forgot they weren't welcome. Someone moves behind you. You hear the rustle of a blanket being folded badly, and someone muttering under their breath, probably about the cold, or the goat, or you. No one is ever thrilled to be second to rise, because it means the hard parts are already taken, and the blame for everything else is still up for grabs. Your fingers have returned to a kind of partial life, not quite dexterous, but at least capable of curling around a wooden spoon or fumbling through the firewood pile. That'll be useful later, when the pot demands stirring, or the troughs need filling, or the kindling needs coaxing with a breath you can barely spare. For now, though, your body protests as you rise. The backs of your thighs stick briefly to the wool of your tunic, which has absorbed both your sleep and your silence. You stand slowly, and the blanket of smoke clings to you like disappointment. Your boots wait near the door, if you can call them boots. They are more suggestion than substance at this point. Cracked leather softened by years of use and years of misuse, one with a hole near the toe that lets you feel the weather more intimately than you ever wanted. You slip your feet in anyway, because there's nothing else. The stiff backs grind against your heels. The insides are lined with what might be old wool or might be hay. It's hard to tell. Either way, it's damp and cold and a little bit alive. The longhouse door is less of a door and more of an agreement. A plank of warped wood on crooked hinges, held shut by a stubborn latch that bites at your fingers as you try to open it. You lift it too quickly, and the metal shrieks in protest. Of course it does. You wince, as if that might unscreech the moment, and push open the door with a groan that comes from both the wood and your joints. Light spills in. Not sunshine, not really, but something brighter than smoke and softer than shadow. And then it happens. The part you've been dreading. You step outside, and your foot hits dirt. And regret. The ground is always colder than you expect, always wetter, always somehow sharper in texture, as though the very earth has developed opinions about your choices. Mud, shallow but insistent, seeps in through the split sole of your boot with the confidence of someone who was told they could stay for dinner. A small stone, round, probably harmless, makes itself known beneath your heel in the exact spot where your patience lives. Your toes curl reflexively, trying to find a better angle, but there isn't one. There never is. You walk like you're learning how all over again. The yard outside is quiet in that miserable, busy way. Nothing is making noise exactly, but everything is doing something. Frost hangs low on the weeds that pass for grass, each blade standing stiff and pale like it's preparing to shatter. The air tastes like smoke and iron and something vaguely sour. Your breath puffs out ahead of you, white and short-lived, as though even the air can't be bothered to linger here. Your feet sink slightly with each step. The mud is shallow, yes, but it's determined. It grips like a promise and releases like a betrayal, squelching softly with each movement as if mocking your attempts to look dignified. You trudge toward the animal pen, because that is where your morning truly begins. Your boots gain weight with each step, collecting layers of filth that dry unevenly and flake later in church when everyone's pretending not to notice. You pass the pile of firewood that was stacked last week by someone who doesn't understand the word stack. It leans against the wall at a dangerous angle, and you instinctively widen your path. One day, that pile will fall. You just don't want it to be today. The chicken coop, such as it is, sits askew in the far corner of the yard, its thatch roof sagging, its walls patched with more wish than material. The hens are silent for once, hunched into themselves, puffed feathers damp from the morning frost. You don't blame them. They look like how you feel, cold, betrayed, and vaguely edible. One of them eyes you with suspicion. You nod in her direction, acknowledging the truce. You've stolen enough of her eggs to warrant the glare. Beyond the chickens lies the well, and that's where your feet take you now, mostly out of habit and partly out of dread. The well is always worse in the morning. The stones are slick with condensation. The rope is stiff with yesterday's cold, and the handle creaks like it's mourning something. You brace your foot against the rim, grip the crank with both hands, and begin the slow grinding process of drawing up water that will be too heavy, too cold, and too full of floating surprises. As the bucket rises, the wood groans beneath your hands. The cord frays in a whisper you try to ignore, and your spine adds its own commentary with every turn. The first splash of icy water against your hands feels like punishment. You spill half of it, dragging it out of the well. The other half sloshes onto your boots, where it seeps into your socks, which haven't been dry since midsummer. You curse softly under your breath, not because it helps, but because it's tradition. The water you carry back to the house sloshes with every uneven step. Your arms ache in that dull, persistent way that tells you you're not even close to done for the day. The goat greets you as you pass her pen, which is really just a polite term for a section of fence she chooses to ignore. She bleats once, long and nasal, like she's announcing your failures to the world. Her eyes follow you with the solemn judgment of a nun watching someone eat meat on a fasting day. You set down the bucket near her trough and reach for the bundle of hay that's only slightly moldy, hoping she'll eat it without commentary. She doesn't. She sniffs it, snorts at you, and walks away. You try not to take it personally. You fail. Back at the house, the door hangs open just slightly, creaking as the wind nudges it like a bored sibling. You duck back inside, bringing the chill with you, and the room swells with foggy breath and muffled movement. The others are up now, shuffling through the half-light like ghosts with chores. Someone sneezes. Someone else drops a bowl. You don't offer to help. You're busy peeling the mud off your boots with a stick that used to be part of the broom. The fire, somehow both brighter and weaker, crackles in protest. The room smells like damp wool and bitter root vegetables. You strip off your outer tunic, soaked now at the hem with a ring of dark, muddy shame, and drape it over the stool nearest the fire. It steams faintly. The damp seeps into the air. You sigh through your nose and sit on the edge of the hearth, your body already sinking into that familiar ache, the kind that starts in the soles of your feet and climbs upward like a vine of discontent. You press your thumbs into your arches, but the relief is temporary. The mud on your calves is drying into a pattern that will remain with you for the rest of the day. You know this. You accept it. You are becoming part of the land. Just not in the poetic way. Someone walks behind you, their boots crunching straw into the floor like a warning. A hand sets a pot on the fire, and the clank of iron on iron echoes through the room like a judge's gavel. The scent of oats, or something trying to be oats, fills the air. Your stomach, reluctant but honest, responds with a low groan. The day is beginning in earnest now, the kind of beginning that promises nothing and requires everything. And your feet, still damp and tingling from their early baptism in medieval hospitality, are already wondering how they'll survive to sunset. But first, there's the matter of breakfast. Something gray, something bland, something that will stick to your ribs and haunt your teeth, something that has probably been reheated one too many times. And as you stare into the thickening steam above the pot, feet still buzzing from their muddy introduction to the day, you realize it doesn't matter what it tastes like, because you're going to eat it anyway. And in the next quiet moment, you lean slightly forward, eyes still half-lidded, and breathe in the smell of charred oats, cracked wood, and the faint, inevitable whisper of goat. The steam from the oat pot still curls in the smoky morning light, but not in a way that suggests comfort. It clings to your nostrils like damp flour and settles in your throat like a promise of blandness yet to come. The scent is forgettable in every way, except the fact that you'll be reminded of it for hours. You watch it for a moment longer, not out of wonder, but out of delay, because the next task waits, and it has no mercy. There's a small wooden basin in the corner, tucked beside the fire where the stone wall is less drafty, though that's not saying much. The water in it was collected the night before, from the same well that gave your boots a spiritual crisis this morning. It sits now, quiet and unassuming, pretending to be something helpful. But you know better. You've met this water before. You've poured it, splashed it, shivered under it. You've cursed it in whispers. And yet, here it is again, patient, flat, cold as a widow's stare. Your body tries one last protest as you approach. The joints in your fingers creak like unloved doors, and your breath comes in short clouds that fade into the chill air before they can gather sympathy. You crouch slowly, knees sending up a telegram of complaint that echoes down your thighs. The wooden stool beneath you wobbles as if it too resents being part of this ritual. It groans as you settle in, not from age, but from indignation. You stare into the basin. The surface of the water reflects nothing helpful, just the dull flicker of firelight and the hazy suggestion of your own face, puffy and pale and rimmed with hair that has decided to rebel against grooming altogether. You reach for the cloth, which was a shirt in a previous life, back before it was demoted to facial duty. It sits in a crumpled heap on the floorboard, stiff in places where dampness and age have conspired to turn it into something resembling a curse. Lifting it feels like handling something long dead and not entirely dry. It resists unfolding. One corner is crisp, the other floppy, and neither inspires trust. You dip it into the basin, and the moment the fabric touches water, the temperature climbs your bones like a bitter memory. Your hand seizes in instinctive recoil, but you force it down. It has to soak, you tell yourself, as if that will make it any better, as if soaking has ever helped anything here. The cold settles into your fingers first, then your knuckles, then your forearm, as if the very idea of cleanliness must punish you for daring to attempt it. You swirl the rag once, twice, watching silt curl upward like smoke. You pretend not to see it. You squeeze it out, badly, because your hands are now barely functioning claws, and begin. The first press of damp cloth against your cheek is sharp, not painful exactly, but immediate, like being slapped gently by something that means well, but has no concept of comfort. The cold spreads across your face like spilled vinegar, leaving behind a tingling reminder that your skin is, in fact, alive. You dab along your forehead, your nose, under your eyes. The rag smells faintly of ash and mildew, and something older. Not necessarily worse, but older. You choose not to assign it a name. Water runs down your neck, cold rivulets that find the collar of your tunic and burrow like guilty secrets. You squeeze the cloth again, watch droplets fall back into the basin, then press it against the other side of your face. Your ears burn now, not from heat, but from betrayal. They were quiet, half-asleep things just moments ago. Now they pulse with the indignity of being noticed. You scrub at your jawline with the soft insistence of someone trying to forget what they're doing. The cloth drags over rough skin and stubble, catching on imperfections you'd rather not acknowledge. A piece of straw dislodges from somewhere near your hairline and tumbles into your lap like it has important business elsewhere. You do not watch where it goes. You know it'll be back later. The smell of goat is faint but present, as if woven into the very fibers of the cloth. You can't remember how it got there. Perhaps from the air, perhaps from your hands, perhaps from the goat herself, who has a tendency to nuzzle things that don't belong to her and linger in places she shouldn't. She's probably watching now, you think, judging you from her post near the doorway, where a small crack in the wood lets in just enough light to ruin the illusion of privacy. You dunk the cloth again. It no longer resists. Now it's simply heavy and full of regret. You wring it out slowly, the water running over your hands and pooling along your wrists, sliding down your arms and into the folds of your sleeves. You know what's coming next, and yet it always feels like a surprise. You lift your shirt, not all the way, just enough to reach the neckline, where sleep sweat and smoky air have formed a gritty, unpleasant mix. The cloth touches your collarbone, and your whole spine stiffens. The chill slides down your chest in little jolts, like your skin is being scolded by invisible fingers. You wipe along the edges, under your arms, behind your neck, all while pretending this is normal, bearable, routine. Which it is, and it isn't. The fire hisses in the background, not in sympathy. It doesn't notice you. The smoke curls lazily upward toward the soot-stained beams, where it will linger and mix with every other morning's smoke until the roof finally gives out and everything has to be rebuilt. For now, the air inside the house remains a stew of breath and cinders and damp wool. Someone behind you clears their throat. You don't look, but you know who it is by the sound. The way it starts as a scrape, then ends in a sigh. A sibling. The one who always forgets to cover their mouth and never rinses the cloth properly after using it. You wonder if this was their cloth yesterday. You wonder if it matters. You wonder if anything matters before breakfast. A child starts crying somewhere in the loft above, not from pain, but from mourning. From the tragedy of waking up and realizing that life is the same as it was yesterday. The mother murmurs something too soft to hear, then thumps the side of the wooden wall in a rhythmic pat that means hush, or breathe, or maybe just, I'm too tired. You press the cloth to your cheeks again and close your eyes, pretending the water has gotten warmer. It hasn't. You dry off with the other side of the cloth, the part that isn't wet but isn't dry either. It's just less. You pat your face gently, as if pretending to be kind to yourself, though your hands are still shaking slightly and your teeth are starting to chatter. The room doesn't warm up. The cold doesn't release its grip. You return the cloth to its corner, where it will hang until the next unfortunate soul needs to feel awake in the most unpleasant way. Your fingers find your hair next, not to comb it. That would require a comb and a will to live, but to flatten the parts that have taken on a life of their own during sleep. It feels stiff in some spots, oily in others, as though your scalp has entered into negotiations with the soot and is close to a formal alliance. You push the worst of it backward and tuck the rest under a wool cap that smells like old bread and other people's heads. Your arms fold across your chest for a moment, hands tucking under your elbows in a poor imitation of warmth. You look around the longhouse. The others are beginning their own rituals of discomfort, rinsing faces, muttering at crusts of soap, poking at their own bits of linen as if hoping they'll transform into something softer, cleaner, less resigned. No one says anything. No one needs to. The room has the quiet rhythm of shared misery. It's a language older than words. You rise from the stool, legs stiff and clothes damp in all the wrong places. The cloth has left its mark, not just on your skin, but in your bones. A thin line of wet runs down your back where the water slid under your shirt, clinging like a tiny eel of ice. You shudder once, not violently, just enough to remember your body is fallible. The basin still waits in the corner, still full, still smug. You do not empty it. That's someone else's job, or no one's. It will sit there until it evaporates, or someone knocks it over, or until it grows something that finally gets noticed. You leave it behind, along with the cloth, along with the hope that next time might feel different. You step back toward the hearth, where the heat barely reaches, but the illusion of warmth is enough. You flex your fingers again, Then press your palms together like someone trying to remember how to pray. You breathe into them. The air smells the same. You've changed nothing, but you've completed the ritual. You are now technically clean. And as the pot of oats begins to hiss and someone shuffles toward the bread bin with the limpness of mild despair, you prepare for what comes next. You prepare for breakfast. The cloth still clings to your skin in places, clammier than it was a moment ago, as if the act of washing somehow called forth more grime from inside you than it removed from the surface. You sit there, not proud, not renewed, but simply done. Just one more ritual completed under the flickering gaze of a reluctant fire and an equally reluctant family. Around you, the longhouse hums with the quiet dread of people who know that breakfast isn't a reward. It's an obligation. A bleak one. Like brushing your teeth with chalk, if teeth brushing were something anyone here actually did. Your stomach has been protesting for a while now. Not with hunger exactly, but with emptiness. Like an old barn door rattling in the wind. The kind of hollow ache that doesn't plead for a feast. It just wants something. Anything. Something warm. Something edible. Something not still moving. The cooking pot hangs over the coals like a hostage, suspended on a blackened iron arm that squeaks every time it's nudged. Someone stirs it slowly, absently, the same way someone might stir a bucket of mortar, more for consistency than care. You can hear the wooden spoon scraping against the bottom, drawing up the charred bits from yesterday's failed supper, folding them gently into today's unpromising gruel like they're honored guests. There's a smell in the air that suggests food, but only just. Mostly it smells like scorched oats and damp wood. A scent that would be nostalgic if it weren't so aggressively unpleasant. You sit down on the bench nearest the fire, which groans under your weight in the tone of a reluctant parent forced to wake up early. It's damp at one end, of course. They always are. You scoot away from the wetness with the resignation of someone who has already guessed it'll soak through anyway. The bowl handed to you is warm in the wrong way, hot on one side, cool on the other, with a slick film on top that clings to the spoon like it has abandonment issues. You give it a half-hearted stir and watch as the surface ripples, revealing grains of something. It might have once been barley. It might be twigs. You raise the first spoonful to your lips, slowly, carefully, because you've been betrayed before. It hits your tongue like warm mud and leaves behind the subtle crunch of undissolved salt and yesterday's ash. You chew, not because you need to, but because your jaw doesn't know what else to do. The texture is somewhere between porridge and consequence, and it sticks to your teeth like a mistake you can't quite spit out. Across the table, your sibling hunches over their own bowl, chewing with the rhythmic despair of someone who has known this breakfast their entire life and expects to know it until death. Their spoon clinks against the rim, slow and steady, and their eyes avoid yours. Eye contact before dawn is forbidden, unless you're planning a duel, and neither of you has the energy for that. There's bread, too. Of course there is. A loaf that was probably baked 3 days ago and has since hardened into something between a building material and a weapon. You break off a piece with both hands, wincing as your thumb bends backward in protest. The crust flakes slightly, not because it's dry, but because it's slowly fossilizing. The inside is chewy, dense, damp in a way that bread shouldn't be. You chew it anyway, hoping it'll soak up the gruel and make the texture slightly more coherent. It doesn't. The milk is poured last, from a clay jug that sweats at the touch. The liquid inside moves reluctantly, thick and slightly off-white, with a scent that suggests it may be trying to return to its original owner. It splashes into your wooden cup with a muffled plop, coating the sides in a film you'd rather not inspect. You sip cautiously. The taste is sour, but not freshly sour. More like it's been sour for so long that it's developed character. You swallow, because not swallowing would be worse. The table is silent, except for the scraping of spoons, the occasional sniffle, and the inevitable cough from someone who always coughs in the morning. The child next to you drops their bread on the floor and retrieves it without flinching. No one reacts. The 5-second rule here is more of a concept than a law, and honestly, if the rats didn't get to it first, you're ahead of the curve. A fly circles your bowl, lands briefly, then thinks better of it and leaves. Even the insects have standards. You try not to take it personally. You shift your weight on the bench, trying to find a patch of dry wood that doesn't also contain a splinter. Your foot bumps someone else's beneath the table. They don't move. You don't apologize. The rules of engagement are clear. If you pretend it didn't happen, it didn't happen. Unless they fart. Then it happened. The gruel has cooled now, thickened into a gluey paste that clings to the bottom of the bowl like a secret. You scrape it up with the edge of your spoon and force it down, bite by bite, each one heavier than the last. It's not filling exactly, but it gives your stomach something to negotiate with. That's all you can ask for. Satisfaction is for people with herbs or teeth. The goat makes a sound from outside. You know the one. The loud, prolonged bleat that says she's either hungry or has knocked something over. Probably both. The sound is followed by a dull thump, then silence. You do not move. That's future you's problem. Someone at the table finally sighs, not dramatically, just enough to mark the end of the meal. Bowls are pushed aside. Crumbs are flicked off the table onto the floor, where they'll become someone else's problem later. Most likely the dog, or the child pretending to be a dog. You finish your last sip of milk with a shudder, set the cup down, and run your tongue along your teeth. They feel fuzzy. You consider rinsing your mouth with well water, then remember how that went last time. Your hands rest on your knees now, fingers sticky with bread crust and cooled porridge. You wipe them on your tunic. It doesn't help. The fabric just smears everything in a different direction. The scent of smoke has returned to your sleeves. It never really leaves. It's in the wool now, woven between the fibers like a persistent memory. The bench creaks as you stand, knees stiff and ankles popping in sequence. Your stomach shifts under the weight of breakfast, not grateful, but accepting. You glance at the basin where the bowls will go, half filled with gray water and floating remnants of previous meals. The idea of washing them is unappealing, but so is everything else. It's all just steps on the ladder of survival, and you've got a long climb ahead. A breeze sneaks in through a crack in the wall, chilling the back of your neck in a way that makes you instantly aware of your damp collar and half-dried hair. You shiver once, dramatically, for no one's benefit but your own. It doesn't make you warmer, but it feels like something a human would do. The rest of the longhouse begins to shift again, everyone returning to the routine with the same level of enthusiasm one might reserve for scrubbing turnips or speaking to in-laws. There's a rhythm to it now, a cadence of footsteps, grunts, and half-hearted mutterings as people collect tools, yank on outer layers, and prepare themselves for the indignities of the day. You, too, turn toward your things, such as they are. A wrinkled pile of garments, a knife that's seen better centuries, a belt with more holes than leather. You don't think, you just begin. Because the animals are waiting, and they don't care that you've just eaten regret from a bowl. The bowl has been scraped clean, not out of hunger, but out of instinct. You stare into its carved wooden belly for a moment, as if expecting it to offer something. Gratitude, perhaps, or apology. It offers only stickiness. A thin ring of cooled gruel has begun to dry along its edges, like it's trying to fossilize itself out of shame. You set it down with a faint clunk on the bench beside you, and let your hands fall to your lap. The weight of breakfast sits uneasily in your gut, not quite satisfied, not quite helpful, just there. A kind of damp warmth curled low behind your ribs, promising a slow and uneventful digestion if you're lucky, and a mild case of regret if you're not. The air inside the longhouse hasn't improved. It hangs in your nostrils with the dull ache of unwashed wool, burnt oats, and the ever-present undercurrent of livestock in various states of opinion. There's a wet sock drying on the rafter above you. It's been there since last week. You've stopped wondering whose it is. Ownership in a home like this is less about possession and more about endurance. If it hasn't moved in 3 days, it's probably yours now. You glance toward your corner, your allotted section of floor between the fire pit and the wall, demarcated by habit and the faint outline of where your body flattened the straw over time. Your clothing pile waits there, heaped like it survived a very small and very specific natural disaster. You exhale softly, bracing yourself for the next indignity, getting dressed. It is not an exciting task. It is not even a particularly meaningful one. It is simply something that happens to you every morning, like dampness or existential dread. The first layer is your under tunic, which is somehow both stiff and limp at the same time, like wet paper that was once folded, then forgotten. You lift it by the shoulders and hold it up to the light that filters weakly through the wall slats. There's a new stain near the hem, yellowish, vaguely circular, and far too symmetrical to be innocent. You don't ask questions. You haven't asked questions about your clothes in years. The answers were never kind. Sliding it over your head is like pulling on a wet sack that was previously used as insulation. The fabric grips your arms halfway through, then twists itself into a knot around your elbow like it's trying to escape in protest. You fight with it briefly, then surrender, allowing your arm to emerge at an angle that can only be described as disappointed. The neckline is stretched, possibly from wear, possibly from panic. It hangs unevenly now, bearing one shoulder and tugging at the opposite hip like it's trying to run away diagonally. You reach for your trousers. Calling them that feels generous. They are more leg-shaped reminders of modesty than actual clothing, patched, sagging, and fraying at every seam. The drawstring is a piece of old twine that used to be part of a broom, and it tightens just enough to threaten circulation without ever actually preventing slippage. Pulling them on is a slow, calculated maneuver involving squatting, pulling, shifting, and that one dance where you try to hop on one leg without alerting your knees. They creak. Not the trousers, the knees. You pretend not to notice. The outer tunic comes next. It's heavier, thicker, and smells faintly of hearth smoke, rainwater, and old garlic. It has sleeves that reach almost to your fingertips, and a hem that brushes your ankles when it wants to trip you. The fabric used to be a richer brown, but now it's faded to the color of overcooked lentils. There's a patch on the left side that was sewn by someone with enthusiasm, but no spatial awareness. And the thread there is a different color than the rest, bright red. You've grown used to it. It makes you feel vaguely festive, like a walking apology note to fashion. Your belt is leather, or at least it used to be. Now it's just a long, cracked suggestion of discipline, held together with extra holes and the distant memory of structure. You wrap it around your middle twice, because once isn't enough to contain the shifting bulk of your layers. It squeaks when you tighten it, protesting in the language of aged cowhide. You tug it one notch too far and instantly regret it, but you don't loosen it. That would mean starting over, and you're not that strong. The socks are the hardest part, not because they're thick or tight, but because they're wet. Not freshly wet. No, that would imply they've recently been washed. They are eternally wet, as if they have absorbed the ambient moisture of the universe and now exist in a state of permanent sog. You peel them from the beam where they've been drying for 3 days, and they slap against your fingers with a sound that could make a saint doubt their faith. You pull them on anyway, because you always do, because the alternative is bare feet and frostbite. They squish between your toes, hugging your ankles with the affection of cold eels. The boots, if you can still call them that, are waiting by the door. You eye them from across the room with the same wariness you reserve for unstable ladders and unfamiliar meats. They have not improved since yesterday. The left one has a loose sole that flaps slightly when you walk, like a sarcastic applause. The right one is tighter, but only because it has collapsed inward at the arch, forming a cozy pocket for blisters. You step into them like a prisoner stepping onto the gallows, slowly, with the full knowledge of what comes next. Your heels sink into the damp lining. You wince. The goat outside bleats in time with your discomfort. She understands. As you straighten, adjusting the lay of your tunic and trying to smooth the neckline into something that won't be mistaken for a theft victim, you catch your reflection in the polished metal of the kettle. You look like a very tired sack of potatoes who once tried to impress someone and gave up halfway through. Your hair is sticking out at one side, plastered at the other. Your eyes are puffy in that uniquely peasant way, overworked, underwashed, and carrying a hint of ancestral disappointment. You nod at yourself, not in approval, but in acknowledgement. You exist. That will have to do. A sibling bumps past you with the subtlety of a falling cupboard, muttering something under their breath that sounds like a curse, a yawn, and possibly a prayer. Their tunic is inside out. You don't tell them. There are no rules for mornings like this, only survival, one layer at a time. You take one last glance around your corner of the longhouse, making sure you haven't forgotten anything. Your belt pouch, empty except for lint and half a nail. A woolen cap that's stiff with the sweat of 3 seasons. A linen kerchief you tied around your neck last week and haven't removed since. You grab them all, tucking them into places where they won't fall out unless the wind gets ambitious. Your hands are dry now, cracked along the knuckles from the cold, from the soapless scrubbing, from the work that never really stops. You rub them together briefly, not for warmth, but for memory, to remind yourself they still work, that you're still here, that the day hasn't defeated you yet. And then, fully dressed and barely functional, you take one stiff step toward the door, because the animals are waiting, and they have opinions. The door groans behind you as you step into the gray morning again, fully dressed, but no warmer for it. Your boots hit the damp earth with a reluctant squish, and the hem of your tunic immediately brushes something wet that should not be wet. Probably dew, possibly something else, but certainly unwelcome. You pause for a moment just outside the longhouse, breathing in the scent of smoke, mud, and stale manure, and gather yourself. Not emotionally. That ship has long since sunk. No, you gather your limbs, your aches, your will to move forward in the face of what awaits. Because the animals have already begun. You hear them before you see them. Faint rustlings, expectant shufflings, the occasional snort from the cow whose entire sense of time is based on hunger and spite. The goat lets out a long, theatrical bleat from behind the crooked gate, one that rises and falls with the arc of practiced drama, as though she has prepared it all night just for you. A hen flaps down from the slanted roof of the coop with a disgruntled flutter, landing in a patch of mud she will shortly pretend to be offended by. Somewhere beyond the shed, the pig grumbles, a deep, sloshing sound that suggests it has already reviewed the menu and found it insufficient. You trudge across the yard with the heavy gait of someone sentenced to farm chores by a jury of barnyard creatures. The mud pulls at your boots like a jealous lover, and each step feels slightly heavier than the last. You pause near the woodpile, partly to rest, partly to mentally prepare for your encounter with the geese. They're not here yet, but they're always near, watching, planning. The gate to the animal enclosure is still held shut by that loop of twine you keep meaning to replace. It's frayed now, sagging like it's just as exhausted as you are. You untie it with fingers that barely bend and push the gate open just far enough to slip inside, where the air is warmer, thicker, and aggressively alive. The animals have been stewing in their own essence overnight, and now the aroma hits you with the force of a damp pillow, heavy, close, and entirely uninterested in your personal boundaries. The cow is first. She steps forward slowly, with the deliberate weight of someone who knows she cannot be ignored. Her breath is thick and hot, misting visibly in the morning chill. You reach for the feed, pouring a scoop into her trough with the grace of someone holding their last coin. She snorts once, a sound that carries judgment, then begins to chew with the kind of loud, smacking resolve only animals and very old men can achieve. Her eyes drift half-closed as she chews, not out of contentment, but out of disdain. You are a means to an end, and the end is chewing. The goat is less patient. She does not wait for her portion. She does not respect cues or fairness. She climbs halfway onto the fence with her hooves splayed like a drunken acrobat and gives you that look. The one that says she remembers what you did last time, and she's chosen to forgive you, but only temporarily. You toss her a handful of hay, which she inspects with the seriousness of a jeweler appraising a counterfeit gem. Then, after sniffing it as though it personally insulted her lineage, she devours it in 2 bites and immediately screams for more. The chickens swarm your boots. You've brought the grain. Of course you've brought the grain. And now they spiral around you like feathery whirlwinds of complaint. Their beaks peck indiscriminately at the ground, at each other, occasionally at your ankles, which they confuse with worms or enemies or both. You scatter the feed with a wide motion, not out of generosity, but in hopes of avoiding another incident where one of them finds its way into your boot. That happened once. You still think about it at night. You make your way to the pig last. He's not actually yours. He belongs to a neighbor who went to visit relatives 2 villages over and never came back. No one is surprised. You feed the pig now. This makes him yours in spirit, if not in contract. He regards you with small, intelligent eyes that shine wetly from his wallow. And when you dump the scraps into his trough, he snorts with something that might be gratitude, but is more likely mild amusement. He eats loudly. Everything he does is loud. His grunts roll through your ribs like a drumbeat. There is no such thing as silence when the pig is awake. You pause for a moment near the water barrel, cupping a bit of cold from its surface into your hands and splashing it on your face. Not to clean, not this time, but to reawaken the parts of your mind that had begun to drift. The water runs down your collar and pools at the small of your back, and you allow it because it's not the worst thing that's happened today, not even close. You grab the milking stool with your foot, dragging it across the packed dirt with a gritty scrape that alerts the cow to your intentions. She shifts, not out of discomfort, but as a reminder that you work on her schedule now. You crouch beside her with the aching familiarity of someone who's done this so many times, their knees now protest out of principle. The milk pail is cool and slightly warped at the rim, and when you press your forehead to the cow's side, the warmth is both comforting and faintly greasy. You begin. The process is rhythmic, unchanging, physical in that dull, persistent way that most of peasant life is. Repetition made personal through inconvenience. The stream of milk hits the bottom of the pail with a tinny splatter, and the cow lets out a low, nasal sound that might be a sigh or might be a warning. You continue anyway. You've gotten good at ignoring warnings. The goat watches this whole process from a short distance, chewing on something that might be straw, or might be the edge of your glove from last week. Her gaze is unblinking. She knows what comes next. You sigh, loudly, dramatically, uselessly, and set the cow's pail aside. The goat is not a cooperative animal. She kicks, she squirms, she bleats directly into your ear at close range. Milking her is less a chore and more a battle of wills. You sit beside her, rest the pail under her awkward bulk, and begin what you know will be a long and undignified negotiation. By the time you're finished, you've lost some milk, a little skin off one knuckle, and most of your remaining patience. The goat skips off as though she's done you a favor, tail flicking with the kind of smug satisfaction that only hooved creatures can truly master. You pick up the pails, heavy now with a day's labor disguised as breakfast, and you trudge back toward the house. The chickens scatter at your approach, though one lingers, eyeing you like it's plotting something. You make a note to keep an eye on her. It won't help. The geese are waiting by the gate, silent for now, heads high, bodies rigid. You slip through the opening before they can block you in. They honk once, in unison, like a church bell that's decided to judge you. The warmth of the longhouse hits you in stages. First your fingers, then your nose, then the flat of your back, where the dampness from the water still clings. You step inside and close the door slowly behind you, holding the pails at your sides like a child bringing home disappointing news. The others are busy with their own forms of suffering, scrubbing bowls, folding linens, scraping something that used to be a carrot into something that might be soup. You nod at no one in particular and set the pails down. Outside, the animals settle into their daily routine. The goat curls herself into the driest corner she can find and immediately begins snoring. The chickens continue their campaign of pecking anything that stands still. The pig lies back in his wallow, dreaming pig dreams that probably involve puddles and power. The cow returns to chewing with the measured resolve of someone who's seen too much. And you? You take a breath, long and slow, your hands slick with milk and hay and the distinct scent of barnyard revenge. You flex your fingers once, twice, then lean against the wall just for a moment, because the fields are waiting, and they don't care that the animals already took most of what you had left. You let the wooden pails down slowly, not out of reverence for the milk inside, but because your fingers have started locking in place, and anything faster might end in a splash and a scream, probably yours. Your shoulders sag, not from the weight of the buckets, but from the quiet understanding that everything you've done so far was merely the prelude. The day hasn't truly begun. The animals were only the audition. The real labor, bigger, rougher, longer, is waiting out there in the fields, the damp ground yawning wide like a hungry mouth that accepts only one thing, your spine. You lean against the doorframe briefly, pretending to study the sky. It offers nothing. Just the same dull woolen gray that's been hanging over the village for days now. A sky that neither cries nor clears, but broods. A sky that wants you to guess whether it's going to rain, and then punishes you no matter your answer. You breathe in deeply and instantly regret it. Smoke, wet leather, and the faint tang of goat urine swirl together in your nose like a soup made by someone who hates you. You blink, adjust your cap, and step forward. The earth outside is less ground and more concept. It gives under your feet in a soft, reluctant way, as though it hasn't quite decided whether to hold you up or swallow you whole. The path to the field curves gently along the hedge, where your neighbor's goose stands guard like a feathered gargoyle. It doesn't hiss this time. It just watches you pass with the quiet judgment of someone who remembers your childhood sins. You nod politely. It does not return the courtesy. Your boots stick to the path in small, personal ways, collecting globs of muck and plant matter that will later dry into something heavier than your shoes. The path narrows, dips, and then spills out into the field, your assigned patch of soil where ambition goes to die. There are tools waiting for you, leaning against the post where they were left yesterday. A hoe, a spade, a rake that lost its symmetry years ago, but still pretends to be useful. You pick the hoe first. It feels familiar in your hand, which is not the same as comforting. The field is mostly furrowed already, but never enough. There's always more to do. Always another row that needs reshaping, another clump of stubborn earth that needs breaking apart. You know this ground too well. You've memorized its texture, its smell, its faults. There's a dip near the eastern corner that collects water no matter how you try to fill it. There's a patch in the center that never grows anything worth eating. You once planted cabbage there out of spite. The ground retaliated with mold. You sink the hoe into the soil with the weight of inevitability. The first strike jostles your shoulder and makes your wrist buzz faintly, like your bones are whispering insults to one another. The second strike is no easier. The third is worse. Your arms begin their quiet protest, not in words, but in dull thuds that travel up into your neck and settle behind your eyes like small headaches with farming experience. It's slow work, purposefully slow, not because you're lazy, but because there's no benefit to speed. You finish early, you just get more work. You go too fast, you miss something and have to start again. So you pace yourself, one row at a time, one stroke at a time, each furrow carved into the earth with a blend of resignation and mild malice. You tell yourself it's meditative. You know you're lying. The soil clings to everything. Your boots grow heavier. Your hands slick with sweat and grit. Your tunic bunches up at the shoulders, the fabric rubbing against your collarbone with all the tenderness of a sharpening stone. You adjust it every so often, shifting the discomfort from one place to another like debts you're too tired to pay. Your sibling is working 2 rows down. You can hear them, though you can't see them. Just the dull thump of their hoe hitting earth, the occasional grunt, the shuffle of feet. They work at the same pace you do, because they've learned, like you have, that there is no reward for efficiency, only the hope that nothing breaks today. Mid-morning arrives without fanfare. The sun never shows its face. The light simply becomes less gray, and the shadows beneath your feet sharpen slightly, like they've remembered how to exist. You pause to stretch, back arched, arms limp, the hoe hanging from your fingers like a question you've stopped trying to answer. Your knees ache. Your calves ache. Your spine has stopped sending messages altogether. You bend to scratch your leg and nearly tip over. A light drizzle begins. Not enough to cool you, not enough to soak the earth in any meaningful way. Just enough to soak you. It slips down the back of your neck, snakes under your collar, and settles between your shoulder blades with a chill that makes you twitch involuntarily. You look up. The sky is still gray, still passive-aggressive. It won't storm. It will just continue like this, insistently mild, eternally inconvenient. You take a step backward, plant the hoe in the ground for support, and wipe your forehead with your sleeve. The fabric is already damp and smells faintly of curdled milk. It makes no difference. Nothing in this field is clean. Nothing in this village is dry. You wonder briefly how people in other places spend their mornings. And then you stop wondering, because it hurts more than your knees. The wind picks up slightly, enough to lift the edges of your tunic and press the fabric flat against your legs. It carries the scent of damp wood and manure, and something else. Baking bread, maybe. If someone in the village is lucky enough to have a working hearth and something left to bake. You let the smell pass over you like a ghost of comfort, then turn back to your work. You lose time. Not in a romantic way, not in a dreamlike way, just in the way that repetitive motion erases everything else. The hoe lifts, the hoe strikes, the earth splits, you shuffle forward, you repeat. Hours melt together like candle wax left in the sun. Your hands go numb, then sore, then numb again. The field does not care. Eventually, your sibling passes behind you, muttering something that sounds like a sigh and a complaint, and perhaps a prayer. They do not stop. Neither do you. There is no point in speaking. Nothing new has been said in years. The last row is always the worst, not because it's harder, but because it knows. It senses your fatigue and resists more than the others. You dig slower. You mutter more. Your shoulder twinges in a way that promises regret, You finish the row, not with triumph, but with the kind of hollow victory reserved for survivors of petty contests. You lean on your hoe, chest heaving, sweat stinging your eyes. You have done it. For now. You look back over the rows, neat, straightish, lined with effort and dirt and a part of your soul you didn't mean to leave behind. The field is not grateful. It never is. Your boots squelch as you step back toward the edge of the field. The mud clings, as always. Your shoulders sag. Your stomach growls. You do not feel accomplished, but you feel done. And that, in a life like this, is the closest thing to peace. You leave the field the way a stone leaves a slingshot, slowly, reluctantly, and slightly misaligned. The soil clings to your boots with a devotion no lover has ever shown you, weighing each footstep as if the earth itself is trying to convince you to stay just a little longer. But you press forward anyway, dragging yourself away from the last tilled row, like someone escaping a particularly needy relationship. Your arms are limp. Your back buzzes faintly with a familiar warning signal that usually means lie down now or suffer tomorrow. And your fingers have settled into a shape best described as tool-shaped. There is nothing elegant about your movement now. You are not walking. You are detaching. The village path reappears underfoot, more trampled than traveled, hardened in some places and mushy in others, like the world couldn't decide between stone and porridge. The drizzle hasn't stopped, though it has changed its personality. It's gentler now, more like a moist suggestion than real weather. Just enough to keep you damp, not enough to justify shelter. You trudge past the hedgerow where a local chicken is attempting to eat something that may or may not be moving. It pauses to stare at you. You don't stare back. That's how it wins. Your stomach speaks next, in low, unfriendly tones. It isn't hunger exactly. It's more like a complaint about how breakfast was emotionally unsatisfying. Your mouth tastes faintly of salt and straw, though you've consumed neither directly. You adjust your belt, only slightly, since undoing it would mean redoing it later, and you lack the mental resolve for that kind of struggle. The belt doesn't help. It just tightens the ache into a more concentrated shape. You ignore it. That's the only option. The break spot waits just ahead. Not a house, not a table, not a proper seat, even by medieval standards. It's a stump. A round, splintering stump that's been there longer than your oldest cousin's toothache, and nearly as beloved. No one knows when it became the break spot. It simply is. It sits slightly off-kilter on a patch of compacted dirt beside the road, tilted just enough to give one thigh more misery than the other. Everyone calls it the good stump, which says more about the alternatives than the stump itself. You lower yourself onto it with the grace of an old sack being restacked. The wood creaks beneath you, not because it's unstable, but because it resents you. The surface is slick with a thin film of moisture, the kind that doesn't show up until it's already inside your clothing. Your tunic drinks it in hungrily, spreading the damp across your backside in slow, sullen blotches. You shift once, then give up. There is no comfortable position here, only positions of slightly less agony. You reach into your belt pouch and retrieve your prize, a hunk of yesterday's bread wrapped loosely in a bit of linen that no longer holds structural integrity. The bread is roughly the size and weight of a brick, and possibly as dense. It smells faintly sour and deeply unpromising. Still, it's food, and the options are few. You tilt your head, examine it for signs of betrayal. No mold, no insects, just a suspicious shine, and bite. It resists at first. Your teeth hit the crust and pause, unsure. You angle your jaw, grip tighter, and finally tear a chunk free. It requires more chewing than you expected. Your molars complain. Your jaw clicks in quiet protest. The inside of the bread is dry, but not entirely uniform. Pockets of flour still cling in the folds, creating small, unexpected explosions of bland. You chew like a person who has made peace with disappointment. A sibling passes by, carrying a bundle of sticks that might once have been a broom or a door or both. They glance at you briefly, then away, as if acknowledging your existence might transfer your weariness to them. They don't stop. You don't wave. The stump does not encourage conversation. It encourages reflection, mostly on your regrets. You take another bite of the bread, this time smaller, more cautious. It tastes like it spent the night absorbing the sorrows of the village. A flake of crust detaches and wedges itself between two teeth. You work at it with your tongue, and fail. It will remain there, a tiny, sharp reminder of this moment, for hours. You reach into your pouch again and pull out the other half of the break, a small wooden flask of broth, or what was broth yesterday. Today it's more of a thick, lukewarm liquid with aspirations of warmth. You unstopper it slowly, sniffing cautiously. It smells like boiled roots and a memory of meat. You tip it back and sip. It sloshes thickly over your tongue, warm in a medicinal way, and lands in your stomach like a damp blanket. There is a twig in it, not a large one, just enough to be noticed. You do not spit it out. You chew it. You swallow. You move on. The wind shifts slightly, curling around your neck and down your sleeves, with the practiced expertise of something that's done this many times before. You shiver once, deeply, involuntarily, and feel the warmth of the broth instantly retreat from your stomach, replaced by the creeping, familiar cool of post-exertion misery. Your skin itches now, not from insects or illness, but from sheer discomfort. Your tunic rubs against your sides where it's damp, chafing lightly. Your back sticks to the cloth behind you. You shift again. The stump shifts with you. You lose. You stare at your hands. The creases are blackened with soil and soot and something yellow that you've chosen not to identify. Your nails are cracked, rimmed in grime, one thumb with a splinter too deep to remove but too shallow to ignore. You flex your fingers one by one. They move like tools, functional, ungraceful, necessary. You press your palms together for warmth, then against your knees, then just let them hang. They swing slightly in rhythm with your sigh. The goat appears at the far edge of the yard, trotting with purpose but no direction. She pauses, notices you, and lets out a sound that combines surprise, offense, and low-grade judgment. You close your eyes. Her hooves click against the ground as she passes. She doesn't stop, but you know she's made note of you. You'll be hearing from her later. The bread is gone now. The broth is mostly gone. You stoppered the flask earlier than you needed to, because the last inch always tastes like something you don't want to remember. You wipe your fingers on the linen wrap, then on your tunic, then on your trousers. Nothing helps. They remain slightly sticky. The break is nearly over. You know this not because someone tells you, but because your body is starting to stiffen again, like it's setting into the shape of inaction. You can feel the muscles settling into disuse, hardening in place. If you stay here much longer, getting up will be a negotiation. You shift once more, then stand, slowly, heavily, like a tree giving up on standing upright. Your knees creak, your back pops, your shoulders roll forward out of habit. The stump creaks beneath you as you leave, as if disappointed you didn't stay longer. You glance back once, briefly. You do not smile. There is still more work. There is always more work. The fields are not finished. The tools wait like bored executioners. The day is not even halfway through. But you had a break, technically, and now you return to the rest of it, just slightly more tired than before. You peel yourself off the stump with the stiffness of someone who's not entirely sure their knees will forgive them. One leg straightens first, then the other catches up a moment later, like a child dragged reluctantly behind. The wood leaves a faint, damp impression on the back of your tunic, a reminder that even your briefest moments of rest come with a fee. The sky hasn't changed. It still hangs there, colorless and heavy, like a damp sheet nailed overhead. Somewhere far off, a crow calls once and is met with silence, as if the day itself is too tired to reply. You begin walking again, or at least attempting something that resembles forward motion. The ground has grown softer since earlier, the steady drizzle of the morning now collecting in dips and puddles with a quiet, gleeful malice. The mud slurps at your boots in lazy pulls, trying to slow you down, to drag you back, as if the land itself resents the idea of your movement. You are not in a hurry, but the mud thinks even this is too ambitious. You pass a hedge you've passed 100 times before, one that sags in the middle like it's given up pretending to be useful. It shelters nothing. It separates no one. Still, you nod to it out of habit, because it marks the border between your misery and the next man's. And borders are important, even if only in theory. You don't need much, just the illusion of your own space. But illusions have a way of breaking at the worst times. And sure enough, just as your feet begin to find some small rhythm again, some sluggish, uneven tempo that lets your knees groan in peace, you hear it. That soft, familiar clearing of a throat. That subtle, weaponized hum that only means one thing. Someone is about to talk to you. You consider pretending not to hear it. You've done it before. You've even gotten good at it. A slow turn of the head, an intentional scuff of the boot, the squint of a man deep in thought. But it's already too late. You feel the gaze before you hear the voice. It presses against your neck like a cold spoon. You turn slightly, reluctantly, and there they are. Your neighbor. Not the worst one, but not the best either. Just close enough in proximity and social standing to feel entitled to your time. They wear that same vaguely stained tunic you've seen every market day since the plague passed through. Their hair is matted from the same drizzle that's worked its way down your spine. Their hands are holding something. A bucket, a sack, a bundle of something that smells like turnips left too close to the hearth. And their face. Their face is already forming that expression. The one that says, I have thoughts. And you, poor soul, are about to hear them. You force a nod. Not too eager. Just enough to avoid offense. That's the trick. Look attentive, but not interested. That way, when the conversation ends in shared suffering, you can say you tried. They step closer. You prepare yourself. The conversation begins. You will not remember most of it. That's part of the magic. It slips into your ears like lukewarm broth, unseasoned, uninvited, vaguely familiar. Words about weather, crops, something the Reeve said, something someone else said about what the Reeve said, a pig that died, a pig that didn't, a child who's been coughing since Candlemas and is now coughing slightly differently. You nod when appropriate. You murmur. You adjust your stance, subtly shifting your weight to give your aching hip some relief. They do not notice. Or if they do, they choose not to care. Their voice is steady, somehow powered by the same mystery that keeps crows circling over compost heaps. It never rises, never falls, just drones on like the creak of a poorly hung shutter in windless weather. You watch their mouth move and wonder, distantly, how many teeth are actually left. You count 2 for certain, maybe 4 with squinting. You realize with horror that you've lost track of what they're saying. You nod again, bigger this time, just in case they asked a question. They smile. You have guessed correctly. Your foot begins to cramp. Not the dramatic kind, but the low, pulsing kind that builds slowly, insistently, like an unpaid tax. You shift again, more visibly now, letting your discomfort become part of your posture. You scratch your ear. You glance behind them, as if someone might be calling. They do not take the hint. They are now describing a fungal condition in their cabbages with the enthusiasm of someone recounting battle. You think about death. Not your own, necessarily, just death in general. the idea of it, the silence of it. Your mind drifts, not far, just enough to keep you from slipping entirely into despair. You think about the time the goat ate your sock and blamed the pig. You think about the bread from breakfast and how it might still be lodged behind your molar, forming a small, edible monument to your bad decisions. You think about your sibling, who is probably working in peace, oblivious, not having to nod at a cabbage monologue. You think about the sky and wonder if it's going to rain harder or just continue its slow, damp applause. They laugh suddenly, loud and abrupt, like a bird startled by its own reflection. You smile instinctively, too quickly, and now you're part of the joke. You do not know what the joke was. It could have been about the Lord's wife, or about the miller's unfortunate dog, or about a bucket that leaked in the shape of St. Bridget's toe. It doesn't matter. You chuckle softly. It's enough. They continue. Now they've shifted to news from the next village over. Someone has fallen ill. Someone has gotten married. Someone has sold a goose that was, in fact, two geese tied together. You nod at the proper places. You grunt in a way that implies sympathy. You scratch your beard even though it doesn't itch, just to appear engaged. The conversation shows no sign of ending. You briefly contemplate faking a nosebleed. But then, as all things do in their own maddening time, the talking slows. They pause to sniff, to adjust their burden, to glance at the sky in that theatrical way people do when they're pretending to be in a hurry. You seize the opportunity. You shift again. You stretch your back. You make a sound, something between a sigh and a word. You say you'd best be, then trail off meaningfully. It doesn't matter what you'd best be. It's the tone that counts. They nod. They understand. They step back. You nod. You shuffle forward. They make one final remark about the road, the price of onions, the moon, something, and you murmur a vague agreement. Then you walk away, slowly, respectfully, just fast enough to escape, just slow enough not to seem rude. Your boots are heavy again. Your legs are colder now. Your stomach is sour. Your brain has been wrung like a damp rag. You do not look back. You return to the yard, or the tools, or the next chore with less energy than you left with. The break was already short. The conversation made it shorter. And now the day feels longer somehow, stretched out like a tunic that's been hung in the rain and refuses to dry. The goat watches you pass again. She does not bleat. She has seen this before. You step into the shadow of your next task, your ears still ringing faintly with the ghost of someone else's voice. And you carry on, because something, somewhere, is broken. And apparently, you are the one meant to fix it. The conversation still clings to you, long after your neighbor has gone. It sticks to your shoulders like the last damp layer of an unwashed tunic, slowly souring with exposure. You can feel it there. Phrases that meant nothing. Gestures that lasted too long. Nods you gave purely out of social obligation. They float behind your eyes now, mingling with the dull ache behind your temples and the way your lower back has begun to radiate a warning throb. Talking, it turns out, is more exhausting than hoeing. At least the hoe doesn't ask for your opinion on local turnip rot. You trudge back toward the shed, or what passes for one. It leans a bit more every year, like an aging uncle whose center of gravity has given up entirely. Its roof is a patchwork of thatch, bark, and wishful thinking. Its door hangs slightly open, held by a hinge that used to creak with purpose, and now just sighs with age. As you reach for the latch, the top slat of the door falls forward with the sort of quiet enthusiasm only poorly aged wood can offer. You catch it, barely, pressing it back into place with a noise that feels more like a prayer than a grunt. Inside, the air is rich with the scent of damp soil, forgotten rope, and that distinct smell of tools rusting in real time. It's not a large space, more of a broom closet for agricultural despair. You duck slightly to avoid a beam that doesn't quite align with the roof and reach for the wooden box on the ground. It's not labeled. Nothing is. But you know what's inside. Nails, mostly bent, and a scattering of iron bits whose original purpose has long since escaped everyone, including themselves. Somewhere in the bottom, there's a small, angry hammer with a splintered handle and a personality. You find it by touch alone, careful not to jab your fingers on the hidden blade of a broken sickle that has been laying in wait like a bitter widow. Today's task is not ambitious. It is not noble. You are not building or crafting or improving. You are repairing, which in peasant terms means you are taking something broken and making it slightly differently broken until it holds itself together out of fear. In this case, it's the gate on the animal pen. Again. The latch has gone slack, the post is leaning inward like it wants to lie down, and the crossbeam is missing a chunk the size and shape of your cousin's teeth. No one admitted anything, but the goat has been smirking ever since. You approach the gate slowly, dragging your feet not out of exhaustion, but to make noise, to alert anything behind it that you are coming. The last time you surprised the chickens, you lost a patch of dignity and a considerable amount of shin. The latch jiggles in your hand like a loose tooth. You lift it. It lifts nothing. The wood groans under pressure, then immediately splits at the corner, creating a crack you're fairly sure wasn't there yesterday. You exhale sharply. Not a sigh, just a compression of air that keeps you from saying things the priest would frown upon. The tools you've brought are laughably insufficient. The angry hammer, 3.5 nails, and a chisel that's been used so often as a wedge, it no longer remembers it was meant to carve. You set the box down beside your foot, brush dirt from the gate with the back of your hand, and begin assessing the damage. Not in a professional way, just in the way one does when looking at something and muttering internally, "How bad is it really if it stays like this forever?" The post is worse than expected. The base is waterlogged. The wood near the bottom squelches slightly when you press it, like old bread. The hinge has bent, not in a dramatic, visible way, but just enough that you know anything you do now will be unmade the moment someone leans on it, or the wind changes direction. You begin anyway, because you have committed now, and turning back would mean explaining to someone else why the goat was found in the compost again. You try straightening the gate first, lifting it gently while nudging the post. It doesn't move. You lift harder. It shifts, but so does the ground beneath it, giving way just enough to ruin any hope of symmetry. The gate tilts further. You let go. It tilts more. You grab it again. Now it's leaning in the other direction. You stare at it. It stares back, smugly uncooperative. You switch to the hammer. The nail you choose is slightly bent, which means it's the best one left. You press it into place at the top slat, where the boards have separated just enough to squeak when the wind touches them. You begin tapping gently, hoping the wood won't crack further. It does. Not loudly, but with the unmistakable sound of a fresh split threading its way through aged grain like a whisper of failure. You pause. You resume. The nail goes in at an angle that's almost deliberate. You leave it there. You try another. This one bends before it even touches the wood. You straighten it against the rock you've been using as a hammering block since last spring. It bends the other way. You straighten it again. It snaps. You stare at the broken half, which now resembles a tiny, angry hook, and toss it into the compost, where it will likely be repurposed by a future generation of mice as a ladder. The goat watches from a few feet away. She's chewing something. Probably rope. Possibly your dignity. You do not meet her gaze. You decide to reinforce the hinge instead. The logic is unclear, even to you, but it feels like doing something. You wedge the tip of the chisel into the post, attempting to shift the plate back into place. It doesn't budge. You push harder. Your hand slips. The chisel bites into the wood, then into your thumb. Not deep enough to bleed dramatically, but deep enough to sting. You hiss through your teeth, shake your hand, suck at the wound. It tastes like iron and poor judgment. You switch to the bottom hinge, crouching now, your knees popping like old thatch under weight. The soil here is soggier than expected. Your boot sinks, your sock squelches. You feel the moisture soak through instantly, spreading cold up your ankle like the breath of a petty spirit. You ignore it. You tap the hinge with the hammer. The hammer slips. The hinge jumps. The gate falls, slowly, almost politely, onto your shoulder. Not hard enough to knock you over. Just hard enough to remind you who's in charge. You shove it back upright, muttering something that makes the goat raise one brow, and drive the last nail you have into the post with the force of someone who knows it won't help. The wood splits again. The nail slides in at a tilt, then stops halfway, deciding it's had enough. You leave it. You test the gate. It wobbles slightly less. You nod. Good enough is not good. But it is enough. You step back to admire your work, or more accurately, to squint at it and pretend it looks better from a distance. It does not. The gate now hangs unevenly, one corner scraping the dirt, the other lifted just high enough to catch the sleeve of anyone passing through. The latch no longer latches. It rests. That's all it can manage. You collect your tools. Your thumb still throbs. Your knee is wet. The sky has grown darker. Not enough to rain. Just enough to suggest that it might, later, when you've left something out that shouldn't be wet. The goat trots past you into the pen without permission. She nudges the gate open with her shoulder, and it swings easily, too easily, before catching awkwardly on the post and rebounding halfway closed. She steps over it. You pretend not to see. You return the tools to the shed. You do not clean them. You place them where you found them, slightly disordered, faintly rusting, and deeply resentful. The chisel glints with a speck of blood. You ignore it. The hammer sighs as you drop it back into the box. You close the door. It doesn't shut. You leave it that way. You walk back toward the house, your hand wrapped loosely in the edge of your tunic, pressing against your thumb. The fabric is rough. The wound stings. You are cold again, despite the effort. Your boot is still wet. Your gait is still broken. But you tried. And sometimes, in this life, trying is the best way to make things worse. The gate holds. Barely. You don't test it again because you know better now. Things have a way of behaving just once when observed, and then falling apart the moment you turn your back. So you walk away slowly, deliberately, as if not acknowledging your own repairs will somehow extend their lifespan. Your thumb throbs. The nail is still under your skin, metaphorically, though you extracted it with enough force to threaten your shoulder. The goat is behind the fence, for now. That counts as success. The yard stretches before you, uneven and patched with the kinds of puddles that suggest they've seen things. Your footfalls are squelched again into a familiar rhythm, the steady, plodding beat of someone who's been walking all day and still hasn't gone anywhere they wanted to be. The smell of smoke begins to reach your nostrils before the house comes into view, which is how you know someone has tried to coax a meal into existence, or failed at it, and settled for heating the disappointment instead. You push the door open with the back of your wrist, your fingers still smarting from splinters and regret, and step inside. The warmth hits you, not as a comfort, but as a change. The kind of warmth that smells like scorched turnips and wool. There's a haze in the air already, the fire having built more smoke than heat, and it hovers in the center of the room like an uncertain spirit. The hearth is alive, technically. Flames flicker around the edges of what was supposed to be kindling, but is mostly damp bark, and the last dry root you could find that wasn't already sprouting. Above it, the iron pot hangs crooked on its hook, tilting slightly to one side as though it's trying to keep its contents secret. You can see steam escaping, thin, bitter trails that carry with them the vague scent of onions boiled until they lost their will to live. Your sibling is crouched nearby, stirring the pot with a wooden spoon that's more char than utensil. They nod at you without looking. Their tunic is patched in a new place now, just above the elbow, stitched hastily with thread that doesn't match. You wonder if they noticed, or if that's simply the fabric of existence here. Everything out of place, everything slightly off. You make your way to the bench with the gait of someone older than you are. Your knees are still recovering from the crouch by the gate, and they make their opinions known as you sit. The bench sags. It always has. There's a shallow divot where you usually perch, worn in by months of weight and damp and sighing. You sink into it like bread into broth, and lean forward slightly, elbows on knees, palms cupped loosely in front of you. Your stomach reminds you it exists again, not with hunger exactly, but with emptiness shaped like a question mark. The bowl handed to you is warm on one side, tepid on the other. It's wooden, scarred, and slightly warped from the last time it was left too close to the fire. A crack runs along the bottom, but it hasn't started leaking yet. It will. Everything does, eventually. The stew, or what passes for it, sits heavily inside. The surface is glossy with a sheen that could be oil, or could be despair. You stir it cautiously. Bits float to the top. A sliver of carrot, possibly. A chunk of bread that dissolved halfway before changing its mind. A single piece of something green that disintegrates the moment you poke it. There's a smell, but it's not strong. Just present, like boiled neutrality. You take a sip. It lands on your tongue without ceremony and slides down with the enthusiasm of wet linen. The flavor is vague. Not bad. Not good. Just flavor-shaped. The salt comes in delayed, and then all at once, as if someone forgot to season the whole pot and dumped everything into your bowl to make up for it. Your lips pucker slightly. You chew, though you're not entirely sure what. The others eat around you, quietly, rhythmically, in the way of people who know exactly how much effort this took and exactly how little it has given back. No one speaks, not because they can't, but because there's nothing left to say. You all know what it tastes like. You all know what it took to get it here. The conversation happened in the labor, not the chewing. You shift slightly, trying to find a better position on the bench. You don't. One splinter finds its way through the fabric of your trousers. You grit your teeth, wiggle, and settle back into discomfort. The warmth from the bowl begins to fade, just as you find the halfway mark. And now the stew turns from slightly comforting to slightly gelatinous. You eat faster. It helps nothing. Your spoon scrapes the bottom, drawing up the layer where everything settled during cooking. Burnt onion, soft root fibers, something that might have been a bean or might have been a beetle. You chew. You do not ask. The texture is what you'd expect from eating with fatigue. Too much and not enough. It fills you, but with something insubstantial, like eating a quilt. The bench creaks again. A child sniffles. Someone's foot taps faintly on the floor in a rhythm that doesn't match anything. You finish your bowl in silence. Not because you're full, but because you're done. You set it aside on the table, worn smooth by 1,000 meals just like this one. Your fingers stick slightly to the rim. You wipe them on your tunic. The cloth is already stained, so the gesture feels more like merging than cleaning. You lean back against the wall, which is slightly damp and slightly colder than expected, and let your head rest there for a moment. The smells settle around you. The last fumes of broth, the smoke from the fire, the undercurrent of unwashed linen and wool and feet. The kind of domestic perfume that sinks into your pores and stays there, even when you manage to scrub the outside. You exhale slowly. The stew has warmed you in exactly the way a bucket of bathwater might. Briefly, vaguely, and with an aftertaste. Your hands rest on your thighs. They twitch slightly. One fingertip is still numb from gripping the hammer too tightly. Your thumb is pulsing again. You rub it absently. The pain isn't sharp, just present. Like everything else. The goat bleats from outside. Of course she does. It's not an emergency. It never is. But it's always time to arrive when you've just finished sitting down. You stare at the fire instead. A log collapses inward. Sparks drift up into the sooty void of the chimney, dancing for half a second before they vanish. You envy them. A sibling starts collecting bowls. The scrape of wood on wood. The sound of spoons clinking like dull bells. You reach forward, hand outstretched, and push your bowl toward them. It leaves a damp ring on the table. You trace it once with your thumb, then let it be. Your stomach is no longer empty, but it's not full either. It just is. Slightly heavier, slightly warmer, slightly more aware of its own discontent. You sit in it, quietly, letting the meal settle in the way wet socks do. Unwanted, but inevitable. You hear someone mutter. You don't catch the words. They weren't for you. Just part of the background, like the creak of the ceiling or the wheeze of the door hinge. Life here isn't loud. It's just persistent. Your shoulders ache. Your legs are stiff. You know you'll have to stand soon. Go outside. Find whatever's next. But for now, you just sit, surrounded by the smell of boiled roots and wooden bowls, wrapped in the thin warmth of a meal that tried its best. You close your eyes briefly, not to nap, not to rest, just to not look at anything for a while. Because when you open them again, the chapel bell will be calling, and the road to church is mostly mud. The bench groans as you stand, though not as loudly as your knees. Your body resists in stages now. Joints first, then muscles, and finally your spirit, which lags behind with a kind of reluctant sigh. The meal did what it was meant to do. Remind you that food is not always comfort, and warmth is rarely enough. You feel heavier, but not stronger. Fed, but not full. It's the kind of fullness that leaves your stomach quiet, but your soul muttering. The chapel bell begins before you've crossed the threshold. Its sound slipping through the chinks in the longhouse walls with all the subtlety of a goat in a garden. The first toll is deep and distant, and it rattles faintly in your chest like a hollow threat. You don't move faster. The bell doesn't care how long it takes you. It will keep ringing whether you limp, drag, or crawl. It always does. The air outside hasn't improved. The sky remains the exact shade of damp wool stretched across the heavens and sagging in places where the wind has tried to tear it loose. A mist has risen, thin enough to not call itself rain, but insistent enough to wet your sleeves within moments. It tastes faintly of soil and smoke, and it settles in your eyebrows like disappointment. You tug your cloak tighter. It doesn't help. The wool is too coarse, the seams are never quite where they should be, and one of the ties broke months ago, so you secure it with a bit of fraying twine that used to bind firewood. The effect is not flattering. Then again, nothing is. Your boots squelch with a sound that defies description, but suggests regret. They are soaked already. They are always soaked. The lining, such as it once was, now resembles a sponge that gave up halfway through a bath. You can feel one heel slipping slightly with each step, a reminder that the sole is beginning to part ways with the rest of the shoe. You walk anyway. The path from the longhouse to the chapel is not a path in any conventional sense. It is a suggestion, a vague trajectory across trampled grass, through low mud, and past the occasional patch of gravel that someone optimistically called a road. There are ruts. There are puddles. There are suspiciously warm patches that you do not investigate. Your feet find them all. Somewhere ahead, A sibling walks in silence, shoulders hunched, cloak drawn tight against the wind that hasn't decided if it wants to howl or just whimper. Behind you, someone coughs. A chesty, lingering sound that could belong to your cousin or your neighbor or someone you haven't spoken to in months. There is no conversation, no greeting, just the slow, soggy procession of obligation. The bell tolls again. Louder now, closer, more insistent. Not angry exactly, but weary in its own way. The kind of sound made by something that's been doing the same job for centuries and has seen no measurable improvement in the humans below. The chapel stands in the distance, a squat, moss-covered structure that looks as though it was built by people who hated corners. Its stones are lumpy, its door is crooked, and its roof leans like a tired man against a tree. Smoke curls from a hole in the roof. Or maybe that's steam rising from the inside. Or maybe the building is just sighing like everyone else. You reach the halfway mark, which is worse than either end. Too far to turn back. Too close to pretend you forgot. The wind picks up, pushing the mist sideways so that it finds your ears and trickles in. You can feel droplets accumulating in the crease between your collar and your neck, soaking into the part of your shirt that was almost dry. The sensation is not unlike betrayal. The mud deepens. It always does, right here. Some ancient cart must have sunk once and cursed the ground forever. Your foot disappears up to the ankle, then the other, then back again. You don't look down. There is no point. The mud doesn't care. It will swallow you the same whether you glare at it or not. You trudge on. Each step requires a negotiation between gravity and willpower. The sucking sound rises to meet you with every lift of your boot. It's not loud, but it is precise. Each squelch is a reminder that nothing you wear is dry, nothing you carry is clean, and nothing underfoot can be trusted. The chapel bell tolls once more, now directly above your thoughts. Its echo hangs like smoke in your ears. The door is open, perhaps by design, perhaps because it no longer closes. A damp breeze issues from inside. It smells of wax and moss and something less identifiable, but deeply ecclesiastical. You step over the threshold. The stone floor is uneven, colder than outside, and generously decorated with the footprints of those who arrived earlier. Mud tracked in like devotion. You follow the path of least resistance, which ends in a spot near the wall, where the stone dips slightly and the wind doesn't reach quite as directly. There's no seating, not really. Just planks against stone or low benches that were never meant for comfort. You sit, slowly. The damp finds your bones again. It greets them like an old friend who never left, just wandered around outside for a while before re-entering the room. People around you cough, fidget, adjust. You do the same. You breathe shallowly. The air is thick. Someone lit incense, or forgot to put out the previous service's leftovers. It stings slightly, like dusty forgiveness. The room is quiet now, save for a few shuffles, a sneeze, and the occasional creak from above where the roof sighs under its own weight. A sparrow flits across a rafter. You envy its escape route. Your hands rest in your lap. They are stained with earth, dark beneath the fingernails, and smell faintly of onions. You flex them once. The knuckles ache, not in protest, but in memory. You are very aware of your knees, and your lower back, and the part of your spine that always pinches after crouching too long near firewood. Someone near the front mutters something that passes for a beginning. You do not hear the words, not because they aren't spoken, but because the chapel doesn't echo. It absorbs. The stones take the sound and hold it like secrets. You sit anyway. You close your eyes for a moment, not in reverence, in retreat. You think about lunch, not because it was good, because it was warm. You think about your boots and whether they'll dry by nightfall. You think about how your leg is still tingling where the mud tried to take your sock. You think about the goat and whether the gate is holding. and whether it even matters anymore. The muttering continues, gently, rhythmically, like someone chanting the contents of a ledger. A finger of cold wind snakes its way through a crack in the wall and touches your neck. You do not flinch. You have made peace with discomfort the way some people make peace with relatives, rarely and with gritted teeth. The bell tolls once more, not from the tower, from memory. You hear it behind your ribs. And then silence, not absolute, just the kind of silence that comes when the words have stopped, but the thoughts haven't. Someone stands, someone else doesn't. The rest wait. You stand eventually, when your knees stop pretending they're fused. You move slowly. The door is open again. Or still. The mist outside has become a drizzle. It lands on your face like a mild reprimand. You step into it. The road back is the same, but somehow worse. Your feet, now heavier with piety and wet wool, slide more than they step. The ruts have deepened. The puddles have grown. The sky hasn't changed. You pass the same patches of grass, now darker. The same ditch, now fuller. The same stone, which you stub your toe against this time. You do not curse. You do not even groan. You simply accept, because this is the rhythm. This is the walk. This is the way of it. You cross the final stretch. Your feet are not boots anymore. They are mud in the vague shape of shoes. The wind has taken your hood and rearranged it into a funnel that collects rain. You reach the longhouse. The door creaks in greeting. You step inside. It is still smoky, still warm in that wrong, uneven way. A sibling looks up. Someone's nose is running. The goat has somehow gotten into the corner again. You sit and think quietly about supper, even though you already know what it will taste like. You return from the chapel with the same aching knees and damp feet that left for it, though perhaps now with a slightly more formal kind of exhaustion. One sanctioned by religious routine and steeped in the vague hope that silent suffering might count for something. The mist clings to you like regret, soaking through the thin spots in your cloak and settling into the stitching, the seams, the marrow. You step through the longhouse door again and find the interior unchanged. Dim, smoky, cluttered with movement but never truly busy. The hearth belches a low ribbon of warmth, more decorative than effective. Someone is stirring something in a pot that smells of boiled root and disappointment. The goat is back in the corner, chewing something that should not be chewed. You sit briefly, not to rest, but to gather the motivation to stand again. Your legs are reluctant. Your shoulders sag in quiet protest. But the floor is hard, and the longer you linger, the more likely someone will hand you something hot, sticky, and awful to scrub. So, with the deep sigh of a person whose entire afternoon has already been stolen by the morning, you rise. The day hasn't brightened. The sky remains in its familiar shade of wet wool, casting a gray that softens nothing. It's the kind of color that makes everything feel heavier. Your limbs, your breath, even the dirt itself, which seems to cling harder now, as if insulted that you tried to leave it behind. The air smells faintly of trampled grass and old ash, and your hands feel gritty, though you can't remember when you last touched anything clean. There is a list of things to do, not a written list. Those are for people who can afford parchment and the luxury of planning. This list lives in your joints, in the scratches on your arms, in the ever-expanding ache in your back. You remember things because your body reminds you. The bend of your spine says you still need to gather more firewood. Your calloused fingers itch with the memory of frayed rope that must be retied. Your stomach, unsatisfied and unimpressed, encourages you towards some vague task involving chickens or turnips or both. So you go outside again. The firewood is never where it should be. There is no neat stack. There is only the general vicinity of logs, some too wet to burn, others too splintered to handle. and one that has become a temporary home for some indignant beetles. You take what you can lift without injuring your wrist again, which narrows your options considerably. The damp seeps through the bark and into your sleeves, and you carry the bundle pressed against your hip, leaving a long, soggy patch that you will feel for hours. Inside, you drop the logs near the hearth with a dull thud. No one thanks you. They rarely do. The room smells slightly less like wet earth and more like tired smoke. You crouch to bank the fire, and the warmth that reaches your knuckles is immediate and deceptive. It doesn't stay. The fire sputters in protest, then flares just enough to illuminate the flecks of mud on your trousers and the general state of grime on your knees. Someone coughs behind you, dry, persistent, familiar. Probably your sibling, the one with a passive-aggressive work ethic and a habit of finding reasons to not lift heavy things. You glance without turning, then stand slowly. The fire continues to mutter, like a relative you wish wouldn't visit but always does. Next is the roof, or the idea of it. A small leak has re-emerged near the back, in the sleeping corner, dripping with the kind of rhythm that suggests mockery more than urgency. You fetch the ladder, an uneven collection of rungs that leans like it's ashamed, and drag it through the muck behind the house. The climb is slow, deliberate, mildly terrifying. Each step is a negotiation with fate. You reach the roof, and the wind greets you like an old foe, slapping your cheeks and tugging your hood into your eyes. The thatch is wet. Of course it is. You shift it with a stick, patch it with a wad of straw that smells faintly of mildew and goat, and try to wedge it into place using the full force of your upper body and some muttered internal curses. The leak, unimpressed, continues somewhere else now. Not fixed, just relocated. You descend, not in triumph, but in resignation. The ladder creaks in what you choose to interpret as sympathy. There is a brief pause where you consider resting, but rest has rules. It must be earned, and you haven't done nearly enough suffering for that. So you pivot to the next task. The chickens, perhaps. One has wandered toward the fence again, pecking at the mud as if gold lies just beneath the surface. You herd it back with your foot, gently, firmly, and it protests with a noise that sounds like outrage in poultry form. The coop is filthy. It is always filthy. You scrape at the floor with a stick that used to be a spoon, and you collect the eggs with the delicacy of someone who has dropped too many before. They're warm in your hand, slightly sticky. You don't want to think about why. One of them cracks faintly when you set it down, and you ignore it. The chickens cluck as if narrating your failure. You return inside, only marginally dirtier, and place the eggs in the same cracked bowl they've always lived in. No one is there to witness the triumph, or the smell. Afternoon passes slowly, like syrup made from disappointment. Time here doesn't tick, it seeps. Your hands are raw from cold water and coarse cloth. Your back has learned new ways to complain. And still, the list goes on. You mend something next, something that no longer wants to be mended. A garment, perhaps, or a tool handle. It hardly matters. The thread is coarse, the needle dull, and your eyes blur if you stare too long. You stitch anyway, badly, slowly, because the only thing worse than unfinished work is work done wrong and noticed by someone else. Later, you're in the field again, just briefly. There's always a reason. A fence that leans, a trough that needs scraping, a patch of earth that might one day be asked to produce something edible. The ground sucks at your boots again. A wind picks up. The clouds shift just enough to let in a narrow beam of light that immediately regrets arriving and hides once more. The goat finds you again. It follows without loyalty, just habit. You do not speak to it. Not because it wouldn't understand, but because it might. It licks your hand once, then tries to eat a bit of your sleeve. You push it away gently, which it takes as an invitation to stay closer. You carry a bucket back inside. half full of water, half full of ambition. Your arms ache, your fingers cramp. You splash some of it on your shoes when the handle shifts. The goat watches. By now, the air inside the longhouse is heavy with the promise of another meal, which is to say it smells faintly better than it did before, but still not good. Someone is chopping something with great commitment and little precision. You move around them, looking busy enough to not be given another task. The shadows have shifted again. Longer now. The kind that stretch across the floorboards like lazy cats, claiming territory and attention. The noise of the day dulls to murmurs and footsteps. No laughter, just movement. You think briefly of sleep, though it is hours away. You think of the mattress, if it can be called that, and whether it has dried from yesterday's leak. You think of your toes and how they no longer feel like part of your body. You think of nothing at all. Another pot is boiling. You are asked to stir. The ladle is splintering. The liquid inside is viscous and orangish. You do not ask what it is. And still, the work is not done. Because in this place, in this time, in this life, the afternoon is never the end. It is merely the second act in a very long, very muddy play that no one auditioned for. You stir. Slowly, thoughtlessly. You stare into the steam and imagine warmth that lasts. Evening waits, just out of reach. Promising rest that comes with conditions. And the sound of the wind through the thatch reminds you that one of those conditions is surviving until then. The faint scent of damp wool still clings to your sleeves as you shuffle back toward the hut. The weight of your limbs matching the leaden sky above. There's a smear of something unidentifiable on your left boot. Likely goat-related, though you didn't ask it to clarify. And your hands are tinged with the sort of earthy grime that only comes from a full afternoon of digging through mud to find a leak that never wanted to be found. You'd like to sit, just for a moment, or lean your back against something solid that isn't judging you for slouching. But the distant rhythmic clomp squelch echoing down the track makes your stomach sink with the grace of a rock dropped in a latrine. You know that sound. Everyone does. Even the chickens fall silent, which feels pointed. It's the donkey. That donkey. The one with the lopsided gait, mangled ears, and a scent that suggests he's been rolling in the ashes of expired cabbages. Riding upon him, slumped like a sack of grudges and unpaid respect, is the tax collector. Again. It's never not again. He arrives precisely when you have nothing left, which is often and always manages to unearth just a bit more. Today, his arrival feels personal, like a vendetta delivered on 4 hooves in a trail of manure. You briefly entertain the idea of hiding, but the hut has 3 walls that work properly and a roof that wheezes in the wind. Camouflage is not among its talents. You straighten your spine out of habit and not hope, brushing the worst of the hay bits from your shoulder as he dismounts with a theatrical groan meant to suggest great burden, as though sitting atop a swaying beast and inhaling peasant misery is somehow exhausting. His boots hit the ground with a moist thwack, instantly collecting a bouquet of muck, straw, and what you hope is not yesterday's stew. He does not greet you. He never does. Instead, his eyes roam your small holding like a miser inspecting a table of crumbs, searching for evidence of excess, of hidden comfort, of sins like second eggs and repaired cloaks. You feel a familiar shame crawl across your skin, not because you've withheld, but because you haven't got enough to disappoint him properly. You hand him the usual, a few coins so battered the faces have worn away into oblivion, 2 eggs that you were rather hoping to eat yourself, and a withered turnip that was supposed to be the base of tonight's feast. He accepts them as if he's doing you a favor, his stubby fingers lingering too long over the eggs like he's mentally drafting their obituary. There's a long silence broken only by the donkey scratching its rear against your fence, a slow, deliberate creaking that feels like mockery. And then, as always, he talks. Not about the taxes. That part is done. He talks about himself, his back pain, his cold feet, his frustrations with the corruption of youth these days, somehow always your fault, and the lingering sadness that he was never promoted to head tax collector, which apparently was promised during a solar eclipse that only he remembers. His voice drones on in a monotone symphony of self-pity, punctuated by wet sniffs and the occasional audible rearranging of phlegm. You nod in the way people do when they've stopped listening, but haven't stopped regretting their life choices. Behind you, one of your younger cousins leans too far out the hut door, chewing on a stick that may once have been a tool handle. The tax collector frowns, as though the child's presence alone is a declaration of wealth, and you can almost see the mental arithmetic playing across his brow. Children eat food, therefore you must have food, therefore you're holding out. He squints at you, and for a moment you fear he's about to demand a goat, a spoon, or your last remaining sense of dignity. Instead, he sighs, loudly, a sigh with corners and weight, the kind meant to let you know that he's the real victim here, having to endure the rustic agony of village visits, mud-streaked tunics, and being near people with fewer teeth than fingers. He begins to climb back onto the donkey with the grace of a catapulted sack of onions, muttering about how he deserves hazard pay. The donkey rolls its eyes, which feels like an editorial. You resist the impulse to bow. He hasn't earned it, and your knees are unreliable after this morning's misadventure with the frozen well bucket. Instead, you perform the peasant version of diplomacy, a bland expression and a muttered, He clomps away, and with each step, the tension leaves your body, not in relief, but in resignation. You are slightly lighter, though not in any meaningful way. Fewer eggs, fewer coins, fewer illusions. The silence he leaves behind isn't peaceful. It's the kind that hovers, like smoke that doesn't quite know where to go. You lean against the door frame and feel it groan beneath you. Somewhere, the wind shifts and brings with it the hint of stew. Not yours, surely not yours. Likely the neighbor's, who bartered a half-wheel of crumbly cheese last week and has been impossibly smug about it ever since. You consider hating them a little, just for balance. Inside, the hut breathes in shadows. Your cousin has moved on from the stick and is now trying to feed a beetle to the goat, who looks unimpressed. The fire is low again, because no one remembered to stoke it, and the hearth smells faintly of damp socks and last season's regret. You wonder, not for the first time, if tax collectors ever pay taxes themselves, or if hypocrisy is included in their official badge, alongside back complaints and a chronic inability to smile. You reach up to rub the side of your neck, stiff from both cold and listening. The sky outside has begun its slow collapse into evening. Not sunset, just the prolonged dimming of an already indecisive sky, like someone turning down a candle out of spite. You feel the fatigue settle deeper now, not sharp but dull, like a stone tucked inside your tunic that you forgot to remove. The kind of tired that makes your bones feel opinionated and your thoughts start to fray at the edges. There are still chores, of course. There are always chores. The mud that must be scraped from the floor, the bucket that needs mending, the roof that creaks a little more with each gust, as if asking politely to be someone else's problem. But for now, you stand in the doorway, the last of your dignity freshly bartered for a sigh and a smirk from a man whose presence makes even the outhouse seem inviting by comparison. You wonder, quietly, tiredly, absurdly, if one day the tax collector will arrive to find nothing left to take. No eggs, no turnips, no bitter silence. Just a faint echo of footsteps and a hollow hut filled with the scent of old straw and things that once mattered. And you picture him standing there, confused, disappointed, trying to tax the absence of things. It is a petty fantasy, and it brings no comfort. But you hold on to it anyway. The goat sneezes, startling the beetle into fleeing. Your cousin laughs with the unfiltered joy of someone who has never bartered away a week's worth of food for the pleasure of someone else's sigh. You turn back into the hut, letting the weak light dim behind you. The fire will need tending. The bowls will need washing. The world has not paused, even if you wish it would. And somewhere, in the distance, a bell tolls, muffled by fog and wind and miles of muddy road. You hear it not with your ears, but with the aching sense that something else is expected of you now. Another duty, another demand, another reminder that the day is not yet done. The next task waits. Of course it does. It always does. And so, with the tax collector's scent still clinging faintly to the air and the weight of unpaid hours pressing against your spine, you reach for the pot, hoping the water inside is at least warmer than your mood. Somewhere in the smoke-thick shadows, someone stirs the stew pot, and someone else clears a space at the table. The heat from the hearth lingers on your cheek like an old grudge, barely warm, slightly suffocating, and never where you need it most. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, both equally sore, as your stomach reminds you with a long vocal protest that it has been nursing disappointment all day. The tax collector's visit sits like a film on your skin, and the draft from the door still hasn't decided if it wants to be wind or insult. Somewhere behind you, the pot begins to bubble with the confidence of something pretending to be dinner. You watch the surface closely. It has the look of nourishment if you squint, sludgy, brown, vaguely vegetal. But you know better. The contents were thrown together from memory, guesswork, and desperation. A few wilted greens, the heel of a loaf older than your youngest cousin, a questionable root someone found under a shed, and a handful of barley that was meant to be saved for tomorrow. It's not so much stew as it is a hot reminder of how long the week has been. Still, it's warm, and that's not nothing. Around the hut, the others begin to gather, like moths to a flame if the flame was underfed and prone to smoke fits. The oldest uncle lowers himself onto the bench with the arthritic drama of a falling cartwheel, each joint making its displeasure known. Someone else, probably the cousin who's always chewing on something inappropriate, drops a spoon with a noise that echoes louder than your will to speak. You catch a whiff of goat, but it's unclear if the animal itself is present or simply haunting the air, which seems entirely possible. Dinner, in your household, is not a ceremony. It is a controlled collapse. It begins with scraping bowls from beneath piles of kindling, half-torn linen, or last year's firewood attempt. None of them match. One has a chip the shape of the bishop's nose. Another is so scorched from a hearth incident that it now resembles a relic. You choose yours not by shape or style, but by proximity and likelihood of holding liquid for longer than 10 seconds. Cutlery is optional. Fingers, unfortunately, are not. The clatter that follows is unmistakably familial. Wooden bowls thunking onto the table like accusations, spoons jostling for elbow room. Voices raised not in anger, but in that specific brand of habitual annoyance reserved for relatives you cannot escape. The pot is ladled with a slowness that suggests both reverence and dread. The first scoop is thick. The second is thinner. By the time it gets to you, it's mostly broth with hints of something that might have once been a leek. You thank no one. Gratitude at this hour is a luxury item. There's no formal seating arrangement, only the unspoken hierarchy of age, size, and elbow sharpness. You end up between the cousin who whistles through his nose when he chews, and the aunt who believes in medicinal herbs, but not personal space. Her cloak smells faintly of boiled nettle and regret. Across from you, someone you're fairly sure you're related to keeps tapping the table with a spoon, creating a rhythm that only they understand and everyone else despises. Conversation, if you can call it that, erupts before the first bite. Not about anything useful. Never that. It's a mixture of complaints, weather rumors, goat gossip, and vague threats of who will be responsible for hauling water tomorrow. A debate breaks out about whether the turnip in the stew is the same one that was dropped in the pigsty last week. Someone insists it adds flavor. Someone else gags theatrically. You stir your bowl and try not to think about it. The eating is not synchronized. It is a symphony of uneven sounds, slurping, gulping, chewing, occasional coughing. There is no silence, only breathless chewing interspersed with snorts. The stew isn't bad, strictly speaking. It just isn't good either. It tastes like the inside of a damp cupboard, vaguely earthy, a little smoky, and faintly metallic from the ladle that's older than half your siblings. Still, it's warm, and the warmth spreads slowly through your belly like a lukewarm apology. Under the table, something brushes against your leg. You freeze, trying to identify whether it's the dog, a boot, or something that requires screaming. It turns out to be a foot, and the foot does not withdraw. You inch sideways, and the foot follows. You say nothing because speaking would draw attention, and attention leads to questions, and questions lead to stories, and stories lead to confessions, and no one here has the energy for another scandal. You instead focus on your stew with the intensity of a monk contemplating sin. The smoke from the hearth has taken a new route through the room tonight, curling along the beams and descending like a lazy spirit. It stings the eyes and settles in your throat, adding a touch of mystery and mild choking to each bite. You hear someone sneeze into their bowl. No one acknowledges it. At this table, sneezing is between you and your stew. An argument breaks out about chickens, who's escaped, who's laid an egg in the communal wash bucket, whose has been conspiring with the neighbor's rooster. It escalates until the goat makes a sound from outside that distracts everyone long enough to forget why they were yelling. The moment passes. A lull settles in. It doesn't last. A baby starts crying. Not yours, you hope. The wailing is impressively rhythmic, almost like it's harmonizing with the whistling cousin. No one rushes to soothe it. This is not a house of immediate comfort. This is a house of eventual resignation. Someone finally rocks the cradle with a foot while still eating, achieving a kind of multitasking that would be admirable if it weren't so bleak. The stew begins to cool. It thickens in the bowl and on the spoon, becoming less food and more sculpture. You scrape the bottom, find something hard, and decide not to ask. The chatter fades into a low, persistent hum of post-meal noises, sniffling, belching, throat clearing. Someone mentions the tax collector again, and a wave of collective groaning rolls through the table like a minor plague. Everyone has a tax collector story. None of them have a happy ending. The bowls are licked clean, either by humans or hopeful dogs. Crumbs are fought over, not out of greed, but out of principle. The conversation turns to nothingness, grunts, eye rolls, the kind of vague speculation that passes for intimacy when everyone is too tired to care. Someone burps with unnecessary volume. Someone else counters with a dramatic sigh. The goat, finally invited inside after braying at the window like a scorned lover, trots across the room, sniffs the empty pot, and looks personally offended. You lean back, slightly, until the bench protests. Your back sticks to the wall, which is damp in one spot and mysteriously warm in another. You don't ask why. You let your head rest for a moment, just a moment, even as someone starts describing their dream from last night in excruciating detail. You stare into the fire, such as it is. A weak, flickering thing now, trying its best not to go out. Much like you. The table does not clear itself. The bowls remain, stacked in a teetering pile that no one wants to touch. The air is thick with the ghosts of cabbage and whatever passed for seasoning. The baby has fallen asleep again, open-mouthed, drooling onto something that might be yours. The candle gutters in its dish, almost giving up. You blink slowly, once, twice, letting the weight of the meal and the noise settle in your bones. Dinner is done. It has been survived. The The warmth in your belly is already turning to fatigue in your limbs. The hut hums with digestion and complaints. You rub your eyes with the heel of your hand and feel grit beneath your fingers. The night presses in through the cracks in the wall, cold and inevitable. Someone reaches for the bowl of leftover crusts. Someone else curses when they find it empty. And just beyond the warmth of the table, in the shadows of the hut, lies the vague, persistent sense that you've forgotten something. Something about soap and regret. The remnants of dinner cling to you like a memory you can't shake. Half-remembered smells, dried flecks on your sleeve, a damp sensation near the elbow that you hope was just stew and not the baby's contribution to the evening. The fire has shrunk into itself again, reduced to sullen embers, and the corner of the room where you sit has grown progressively colder, as though the walls are holding a quiet grudge against your presence. The air feels thick, heavy, and tinged with that all-too-familiar mix of smoke, wet wool, and humanity. It occurs to you, as it occasionally does in these rare reflective moments, that you smell like a fermented boot. This, you decide, cannot stand. It is not a desire for dignity or freshness or even self-respect that drives you. It is the simple, grim realization that you've become sticky in places you did not know could be sticky. A layer of itch has been developing under your tunic since midday, like a second, less cooperative skin. The collar of your shirt has fused to your neck in some humid alliance. A patch of something has formed behind your knee that seems to function as a mild adhesive. You smell like several unpleasant things, layered in sequence: onion peel, wet straw, wood smoke, and something faintly barnyard in tone. Something must be done. The decision to attempt to wash is never wise, only inevitable. There is no bathhouse here, no warm marble basin, no servant waiting with oils. What there is, a splintered wooden tub leaning against the outside wall like it's considering escape, and a battered bucket that smells like it previously held something that tried to crawl out. You fetch the bucket and begin the slow, laborious process of gathering water from the barrel. The barrel is full of what could technically be called water, in the same way a chicken coop could technically be called shelter. It is rain-caught, leaf-muddled, insect-flavored, and tepid in that way that promises disease rather than refreshment. Still, it sloshes. That's enough. You heave the bucket to the tub, which creaks with disapproval. You pour carefully, as though delicacy might somehow make the experience less horrifying. It does not. The water strikes the bottom of the tub with a wet, hollow sound that somehow echoes your internal dread. It smells faintly of moss and something sour. You consider boiling it briefly, but the fire inside has mostly died, and your patience along with it. Warmth is a privilege, and tonight, like many nights, you are a peasant. Stripping is its own small journey. Your tunic does not come off so much as detach, reluctant and sticky. The woolen underlayer, once beige, now a sort of tragic gray-brown, peels away with audible effort. Your skin flinches from the air, gooseflesh rising like a protest. You catch a glimpse of your own arms in the dim torchlight, pale in places, blotchy in others, speckled with scratches, soot, and what you suspect is last week's soup. The moment you lower yourself into the tub, the water reacts first. It slaps your body like an insult, cold, unyielding, and undeserved. You make a sound not unlike a stepped-on duck. The water settles after its assault, leaving you shivering, hunched, and glaring into the middle distance with the haunted expression of someone who has seen things. Your feet barely fit. Your knees jut upward like disgruntled elbows. Your rear rests on the slanted bottom of the tub, which seems designed to remind you that comfort is for the nobility. There is soap. Technically, it's a crumbling beige lump that smells vaguely of fat and ash. It does not lather. It does not glide. It resists, scraping over skin like a guilty conscience. You scrub with a rag that used to be a tunic, and before that was possibly upholstery, judging by its weave. It holds water like a grudge, smears more than it cleans, and smells of mildew and despair. Still, you scrub, under the arms, behind the ears, along the collarbone. The rag sags in protest, absorbing your ambition. Rivulets of cloudy water trail down your chest and arms, carrying with them weeks of accumulated grime and something that looks suspiciously like porridge. The water in the tub darkens to a tone best described as regret. Your toes have gone numb. Your shins ache. A breeze sneaks in through a crack in the wall and traces its way across your wet back, like the ghost of a cruel ant. You shudder, momentarily considering whether cleanliness is truly worth hypothermia. It is around this time that your sibling opens the door, just a crack, and sees you in the tub. You meet their gaze. They say nothing. They close the door. The damage is done. The soap slips from your hand, lands in the water with a plop, and vanishes into the murk. You do not go looking for it. It has made its decision. Rinsing involves scooping water over yourself with the smaller wooden bowl, a process that ensures maximum splash and minimum efficiency. The water strikes your skin in irregular slaps, sending shivers down your spine and into places you hadn't planned on involving. Your ears fill with a faint ringing, your teeth chatter in Morse code, and your spine becomes a series of tightly clenched regrets. Every time you think you are rinsed, another patch of stickiness makes itself known. You try to scrub again. The rag falls apart mid-swipe. At last you emerge, dripping and disillusioned. The wind hits your damp skin like 1,000 whispered insults. You grab the closest linen, which might be a towel or might be a curtain, and begin the drying process, a term that implies far more success than is warranted. The fabric is rough, stiff, and dusted with particles of something you choose not to investigate. It absorbs your moisture in theory, but mostly just moves it around. Clothing yourself again feels like layering wet bark over chilled meat. Each piece clings, traps dampness, and reminds you that your body is not designed for this era. The tunic sticks. The trousers sag. The belt refuses to tighten in any meaningful way. Your feet slide into damp socks with the kind of squelch usually associated with swamps or moral compromise. You are clean now, or cleaner, or at least no longer actively fermenting. Your skin itches in new places, a kind of post-scrub betrayal. You smell faintly of soap, but also of wet wool, cold air, and that one corner of the tub you hope never to revisit. The room you return to is no warmer than the tub. The fire has died. The goat has taken your place near the embers and does not intend to move. Your spot on the bench is suspiciously damp, though from what, you cannot say. A cousin looks up, sniffs, and offers a grunt that might be approval or confusion. You sit, radiating the sort of chill that seeps into furniture and relationships. Later, when you crawl into your straw mattress, the lingering moisture on your back will meet the scratchy bedding in a clash of temperature and texture that reminds you of every mistake you've ever made. The smell of damp fabric will mingle with smoke, feet, and the faint ghost of your forgotten soap. And just before sleep threatens to arrive, you will remember there are still children to contend with, and one of them always needs something right as your eyes begin to close. The warmth of your bath, if one can call a splash in cold, insect-laced rainwater a bath, has long since fled your bones, leaving behind a damp chill that clings like a persistent accusation. Your tunic, only halfway dry, has resumed its usual cling to your spine, which in turn has resumed its usual protest. You've settled near the hearth again, though the hearth itself is sulking, reduced to embers and giving off the kind of warmth best described as metaphorical. The goat has returned to her favorite spot near the fire, her hooves tucked beneath her like she owns the place, and you don't have the energy to challenge her. Your legs ache, your shoulders slump, and your brain has begun the slow descent into the foggy half-sleep that is as close to rest as you typically manage. And then, of course, the children find you. They never approach so much as descend. A swarm, a tangle, a collective force of chaos and questions and suspicious stickiness. You're never quite sure how many of them belong to you. Some certainly do. Others belong to your siblings, your neighbors, the neighbors' neighbors. A few may have simply wandered in, settled into the straw by the door, and been quietly absorbed into the collective. No one checks. No one dares. One of them is chewing something unidentifiable. Another has something crusted across their face, in a pattern that suggests artistic intent. A third clings to your leg like a barnacle with abandonment issues. You sigh, which is a mistake, because the moment the air leaves your lungs in that particular tone, they take it as an invitation. They do not want anything reasonable. One wants to know if goats dream. Another wants you to make a bird noise. A third insists they saw a demon under the table, which would be more concerning if this weren't the fifth such sighting this week. You respond with the one tool you have left: half-hearted storytelling and full-bodied resignation. You pull the nearest child into your lap, possibly yours, possibly not, and begin weaving a story with the kind of lazy invention that would horrify any actual bard. You speak of a potato that tried to escape the stew pot. You mention a hedgehog with ambitions. You introduce a noble chicken who once fought a knight and won by default when the knight fell asleep. It makes no sense. It doesn't have to. They stare with the wide-eyed awe of creatures who still believe stories can fix things. The others crawl closer, forming a lumpy semicircle of damp hair, bruised knees, and aggressively loud breathing. One of them is definitely picking their nose. Another is definitely eating something off the floor. You do not intervene. The concept of hygiene has already been stretched to its limits today. The straw beneath you rustles with every twitch and shuffle. A child coughs directly into your ear. One leans their entire body weight against your arm with the subtlety of a collapsing roof beam. Someone's foot, small, bare, cold, finds its way beneath your tunic hem and rests against your shin like an unwelcome truth. You accept all of this in the spirit of parental inevitability. Eventually, you trail off. Your story ends not with resolution, but with a vague gesture toward bedtime and a hero who probably got a snack and lived. It is enough. The younger ones nod with the solemn gravity of the recently entertained. The older ones roll their eyes in that uniquely youthful way that suggests they understand sarcasm, but not taxes. One child announces they're not tired. You ignore them. The process of bedding down the children begins, though bedding is an optimistic term. There is no order, no structure, just a collective drift toward the straw piles, the corners, the nests of fabric and hay, and discarded turnip sacks that serve as miniature sleep zones. You supervise in the way one supervises rain, by being present and hoping not to get too soaked in the process. You pull a wool scrap over one child's shoulders, only to find it immediately claimed by another. You step over 3 small bodies to reach a blanket that's mostly holes. Someone screams, someone else laughs. A third demands water, then immediately spills it. The goat observes all this from her throne near the fire, chewing with the calm detachment of a creature who knows she will never be asked to parent. Eventually, the noise softens. Not vanishes, never that, but dulls, like the wind behind thick shutters. Children begin to settle, limbs askew, breathing loud and uneven. One hums tunelessly to themselves, the same 2 notes over and over. Another twitches in their sleep, whispering about bread. You tuck one child's arm back under the blanket, only for their foot to re-emerge, flailing like it's trying to escape. You sigh again. You ease yourself down against the wall, letting your head rest on the least lumpy part of the wood. It smells like damp wool and very old soup. You close your eyes briefly, only to be jolted back awake by a sudden whispered question beside you. Do ghosts eat chickens? You do not respond. You pretend to be asleep. It is the only defense you have left. The darkness outside deepens. You can hear the wind picking at the walls, testing for weaknesses. The fire is now more ember than flame, sending occasional pops into the silence. One of the children begins to snore, loudly, irregularly, like someone sawing through wet wood with a dull blade. Another child mutters a name in their sleep. You don't recognize it. That somehow makes it worse. A child at your feet sneezes explosively and then immediately falls back asleep. You envy their ability to transition between states so effortlessly. Your body, meanwhile, remains locked in a position best described as structurally compromising. Your hip is pressed against a knotted floorboard. Your spine curves in sympathy. Your shoulder has fallen asleep before you have. You think of tomorrow, of more mud, more potatoes, possibly more tax. You think of your own childhood, shorter, colder, somehow even louder. You wonder if your parents also stared at the thatch ceiling, covered in straw and half-dried bathwater, surrounded by tiny versions of themselves, and thought, why is it always so loud? One of the children begins to grind their teeth. Another murmurs something about cabbage. Someone, somewhere in the room, emits a noise that can only be described as suspiciously wet. You choose not to investigate. Instead, you focus on the rhythm of breathing, the slow descent of limbs into stillness, the way the goat finally exhales through her nose like she, too, has been waiting for silence. And eventually, the silence comes. Imperfect, of course, laced with snores and sniffles and the occasional whimper, but silence nonetheless. You shift one last time, easing your back against the wall, pulling a corner of someone's blanket over your knees. Your feet are cold. Your head itches. But for now, no one is asking you questions. For now, they sleep. And in this brief, borrowed quiet, before the next task reminds you it exists, you allow yourself a moment of stillness, just long enough to remember you haven't sharpened your blade yet, and you're almost out of thread. But those are problems for later. For now, there is straw beneath your legs, warmth from shared breath, and a night still full of forgotten chores. The fire is nearly gone now. Just a stubborn red eye blinking up from the coals like it, too, is tired of the day. Around you, the longhouse hums with the slow rhythm of sleeping breath, the shuffling weight of bodies giving in to exhaustion, and the layered warmth of many lives crammed into too small a space. The air is thick with the musk of wool, wood smoke, and skin. Someone nearby is snoring in the wet, fluttering way that suggests their sinuses gave up long ago. You shift slightly beneath a ragged wool blanket that smells like damp hay and worse decisions, easing one hip off the cold-packed floor, careful not to disturb the child curled beside you like a little bag of elbows and hayseed. It should be over by now. The day, the motion, the struggle, the endless queue of chores masquerading as necessities. And for a moment, it feels like it is. Your body sinks a little deeper into the scratchy fold of sleep, one side pressed against the wall, the other against someone's discarded tunic, stiff with the kind of grime that builds character and tetanus in equal measure. Your fingers go numb in the draft curling under the door. Your thoughts begin to drift, not float, not fly, but slump, toward a soft, vegetable-scented fog of slumber. And then, as if summoned by the ghosts of tasks unfulfilled, your brain whispers a list. It starts with something gentle. The hens. Did you lock the coop? You remember passing it. Dim light, crooked fence, something flapping, but no clear image of sliding the bar across. And if you didn't, well, the fox certainly won't remind you politely in the morning. Your body protests as you peel back the blanket, every joint voicing its own unique betrayal. You unfold yourself like badly tied laundry, brushing straw from your knees and hoping none of it is alive. The floor is colder than you remember, and not just cold, moist. The kind of chill that seeps upward, toe by toe, until your bones feel like a bog artifact. You pad past sleeping limbs and the occasional twitching foot, step over the goat, who sighs dramatically, as if you've wronged her personally, and reach for the door with the kind of dread usually reserved for outhouses in winter. Outside, the air bites. It doesn't nibble or tease. It sinks in with purpose, like an unpaid debt. Your breath fogs into the darkness, a pale ghost that escapes before you can stop it. The sky is a tattered wool cloak overhead, stars stitched unevenly into its seams. You make your way to the coop, guided by memory, moonlight, and the occasional squelch of something unfortunate underfoot. The coop is, of course, ajar, not flung wide, not swinging gently like a scene from a tragic tale, just slightly, irritatingly ajar. The kind of mistake that mocks you with its subtlety. You slide the bar across, wiggle it to be sure, and murmur a silent apology to the hens, who are too busy sleeping in a haphazard pile of feathers and dreams to care. The smell inside is powerful, like damp hay that's been fermented in fear and droppings. You try not to breathe deeply. Back toward the house now, but the list isn't done. Oh no. Your brain, that tireless little saboteur, reminds you of the tool, the one you promised to sharpen after supper. It's still resting by the hearth, dull and accusing. You could leave it, pretend it isn't important, but you've played that game before. You know what happens when tomorrow's chores arrive, and your blade is about as useful as a buttered turnip. So you return inside, closing the door behind you with a creak that sounds louder than thunder in the hush. The room hasn't changed, except now the snoring has escalated into something resembling competitive performance. You tiptoe around sleeping forms, retrieve the blade, and settle near the hearth where the last of the coals sulk like old men in a corner. The sharpening stone is cold in your hand, rough and unwilling. You drag the blade against it slowly, rhythmically, the scrape echoing just faintly beneath the snoring chorus. The motion is meditative, in the way that all things are when you're too tired to feel your feet. Back and forth, forward, then back again. Sparks flit, barely visible, more suggestion than light. You think briefly about all the things this blade has done. Not noble things, not glorious things, but survival things. Things involving roots and rope and unfortunate rodents. You finish with numb fingers and a shoulder that twinges every time you shift. The blade goes back to its place. Not clean, not polished, just ready. That's all it needs to be. You could stop now. You should. But of course, you won't. The patch in your tunic has been bothering you for days. An irritating flap just below the rib that catches on everything and collects crumbs like it's building a private granary. And now, in this half-light, with your body already betrayed by motion, you fetch the needle and the miserable bundle of thread that lives in the corner tin. It smells like old smoke and wet sheep, and you've never been sure whether the tin was originally meant for thread or lard. The stitching is uneven, your fingers stiff and uncooperative. You jab yourself twice, curse silently once, and knot the thread into something that holds, barely. You could do better if you weren't so tired, but that phrase applies to everything. You put the tunic down, stretch your spine, let your shoulders sag. You almost make it back to your spot on the floor, almost, when your stomach makes a noise that isn't so much a growl as a groan of betrayal. You'd forgotten, in the rush and the noise and the bath that wasn't, that you barely ate. A chunk of crust here, a spoonful of stew there. You'd offered the rest to the children. They accepted without a second thought. There's nothing hot left, of course. Just a lump of cold bread and a smear of something unidentifiable in the pot's corner. You chew slowly, letting it soften in your mouth like wet bark, and try not to think about what the pot might have absorbed over the years. The taste is bland, but not offensive. That's the highest compliment you can offer tonight. At last, finally, you ease yourself back into the straw. Someone has taken your blanket and replaced it with a different one, thinner, damper, and unmistakably smellier. You don't protest. You're too far gone for resistance. Your body curls into itself like a dying fern, seeking warmth where there isn't any. The children are still. The goat has resumed snoring, softly now, as if she feels guilty. The wind outside presses against the boards in long, deliberate breaths. Somewhere behind you, the roof creaks with the knowledge of age. The fire gives one last pop, like a final complaint, and then goes quiet. Your eyes close slowly, like doors on rusted hinges. But just before sleep arrives, just before the final drop into darkness, your brain reminds you, with perfect timing, of the candle. The last one, the one you used and forgot to replace. Of course, you'll remember to deal with it tomorrow, unless tomorrow forgets you first. The straw shifts beneath you again, for what must be the 100th time. You tell yourself this is the last adjustment, that if you just move one more elbow, rotate one more hip, shuffle one more tuft of itchy bedding into place, the blanket will fall correctly and your body will agree to rest. But of course, it doesn't. It never does. Your shoulder finds the same sharp twig you pulled out half an hour ago, or thought you did. You wiggle a toe, and it touches something cold and faintly wet, possibly a piece of turnip, possibly a sock, possibly something you'd rather not identify with your foot. Your eyes open reluctantly to the darkness, and you are greeted by a ceiling you cannot see, and a silence that is not silent. The house is full of sleepers, and yet not still. Snoring has become a background drone, a shifting, wheezing tapestry of nasal turbulence. It rolls across the room in waves, high-pitched from the baby, ragged from the uncle in the corner, punctuated by the goat's intermittent sighs and an occasional fart that seems to echo off the wooden walls like a tiny, tragic trumpet. Somewhere near your head, someone grinds their teeth in their sleep. You try not to take it personally. You try not to think about how loud you must seem when you breathe in return. Your own breath feels too warm. The wool blanket that covers you, borrowed from a cousin who swore it had been washed, traps more than warmth. It traps the sour scent of feet, fire smoke, and something that might once have been cabbage stew. You shift your knees again, attempting the impossible, comfort. Your reward is a sharp jab from the floorboards below, an exposed nail or knuckle-sized knot of wood, the kind that has developed a personal vendetta against your lower back. You roll onto your other side and immediately regret it. Now you're facing the wall. The wall, for its part, is slightly damp and radiates a cold that feels intentional. It leaches into your forehead if you get too close, so you back away an inch, only to be greeted by a sudden draft creeping through the unseen cracks near your feet. The house breathes like a tired animal, exhaling warmth near the fire pit and inhaling cold through its seams. You, unfortunately, are sleeping in one of the house's nostrils. The thin mattress of straw rustles with each twitch. You've tried to lie still. You've told yourself many times that stillness is the only path to sleep. But your body is a conspiracy of itches and aches, all of which take turns being the most urgent. Your ankle throbs from where you turned it earlier on the wet step. Your shoulder remembers lifting the bucket wrong, again. Your neck has become a question mark, curved and doubtful. And then there's the itch. That one. That itch that migrates. First your knee, then the base of your spine, then your scalp in that unreachable spot just beyond your reach unless you contort like an angry cat. You reach up to scratch it anyway and knock a piece of straw loose from your pillow, which is not so much a pillow as a sack filled with the softest of firewood scraps. It crinkles loudly. Or maybe not loudly, but in the nighttime, all sounds are magnified, and you're sure everyone heard. No one stirs, of course. Everyone else is deep in the kind of sleep that only comes to those with fewer thoughts or fewer teeth. You close your eyes again. Try to count the ceiling beams you can't see. You know they're there. You remember them during the day, crooked and smoke-darkened, lined with cobwebs that shimmer when the sun catches them. One of them has a loose splinter that always seems to aim itself toward your head when you stand. You tell yourself to think of that beam, to picture the texture of the wood grain, the way it snakes around a knot near the middle like a spiral of time. But instead, your thoughts slide sideways into tomorrow's chores. The bucket with the cracked handle, the patch of fence that sags every time the wind sighs, the neighbor's chickens who look at you like they know something. You turn again, this time with finality. Or so you hope. The blanket is twisted beneath you, but you don't have the energy to fight it. Your toes peek out from one end, instantly punished by cold. You retract them quickly, as if the air itself has teeth. Beside you, the child stirs. A tiny hand smacks you in the ribs, then retreats as quickly as it arrived. The child says nothing, already back in whatever dream children dream, probably one involving a world without turnips. You settle back again and try not to think about how loud your stomach sounds. It's not hungry, not really. Just unsettled. The kind of gurgle that suggests regret, possibly from that spoonful of stew you found clinging to the side of the pot hours ago and decided to eat anyway. You inhale deeply through your nose. Bad idea. The air is thick with smells that defy individual identification, but collectively spell unwashed humanity. Somewhere near your feet, someone has removed their shoes, and it's made everything worse. Your own scent is not blameless. You catch a whiff of your own undertunic, which hasn't seen soap since the last baptism of a piglet. You consider lifting the blanket to air out, but the cold swats that idea down before it's fully formed. The fire is nearly gone now, just a low, smoldering glow that casts faint shadows across the floor, turning straw into twitching insects, and the stool into some creature hunched in wait. You know it's just the stool. It's always just the stool. But in the early hours of not quite sleep, imagination has sharper edges than truth. You consider sitting up. Just briefly. Maybe stretching would help. But you know how that ends. One creak of the floorboard, one misplaced elbow in the dark, and you'll rouse the goat. Or worse, the cousin who sleeps like a bear, but wakes like a rooster. No, better to stay here. To lie as still as the itch will allow, letting the discomfort wash over you like a poorly made blanket. The minutes crawl. You feel each one. Not ticked, not talked, just felt. Like grains of barley passing through a narrow sieve. You imagine the sunrise, not with hope, but with resignation. Another day, another list of things you forgot to do. Another round of listening to the same complaints about the same sore hip and the same missing egg that everyone blames on your side of the family. You squeeze your eyes shut and try again. This time you focus on breathing. In, outside, in. You pretend your breath is wind, curling through the rafters. Outside. You imagine you are a loaf of bread, cooling slowly by the fire. Dense, half-burnt, but warm. In, outside. The warmth doesn't come, but the image stays. A loaf of bread, maybe with herbs if you're lucky, maybe with raisins if you're dreaming. You wonder when the first rooster will crow. Probably soon. He's always early, always smug. You think about him sometimes when sharpening the knife, not seriously, just idly. The snoring changes tempo. The old man shifts in size. A dog outside barks once, then is quiet. You feel the entire house breathe again, creak, settle, mourn. You stare into the darkness, willing your thoughts to thin, to soften, to fade. They do not. But they do begin to blur. Not sleep, but something close to it. A kind of surrender. The warmth doesn't come. The comfort never arrives. But the weight of the day is heavier now, even in rest. And so, your limbs begin to forget how to move. Your thoughts slow, then loop. The same memories, half-formed, circling like laundry on a line that never dries. Eventually, the question becomes not when you will sleep, but whether sleep will find you before the rooster does. Eventually, your mind stops making sense. Not in the charming, poetic way a bard might tell of dreams stitched from stars and memory, but in the more honest, bedraggled sense, like a wheel turning in the mud long after the axle has snapped. You're still lying there, in the same scratchy posture you've twisted yourself into over and over, limbs crisscrossed like a poorly drawn goat. The blanket is still wrapped around your ankle in a way that feels slightly accusatory, and the air in the longhouse is no warmer than it was an hour ago, but your resistance is weakening. Not because the discomfort has gone. Oh no, the straw still pokes, the goats still smell, and your right hip is currently hosting a cramp the size of a walnut, but because the weight of existing has worn your thoughts smooth. You are not warm, you are not clean, you are not full, but you are, at long last, tired enough to surrender. You feel it not as a gentle invitation, but as a blunt object descending from above, a sensation not unlike being mugged by your own exhaustion. There's no fluttering eyelid moment, no graceful fade. It hits you, hard, like a brick to the face. A very old brick, one chipped at the edges and vaguely damp from sleeping in the wall too long. A familiar brick somehow. You might have used it to prop the door open last spring. Sleep doesn't arrive with any ceremony. It just slides in while you're too tired to stop it. One moment you're counting imaginary ceiling beams again, visualizing that one warped plank that always droops like a sad eyebrow, and the next you're gone, though not quite entirely. Your thoughts become sludge. You're no longer thinking about the chickens or the fire or whether tomorrow's stew will include something recognizably edible. You're instead staring down an image that makes no sense at all, perhaps a dancing turnip with your cousin's voice, or the bucket from earlier begging for forgiveness. You don't know. You don't care. Your body, at last, has grown heavier than your thoughts. Your mouth hangs open a little. You know this because your tongue has dried into the shape of a regret. Your hands are bunched near your chest, one of them curled into the corner of the blanket like you're holding a baby mole for warmth. Your feet somehow have lost all circulation and yet are sweating. The itch on your scalp has given up. Even your backache, long your most faithful companion, has begun to dim into the distant hum of something less painful and more philosophical. Not absence, just acceptance. You're aware, vaguely, of the others, of the cousin who mutters his dreams into the haystack, as if narrating a particularly boring sermon, of the goat, who has somehow wandered closer in the night, and is now gently exhaling cabbage-scented warmth onto your shin. You could push it away, but the goat is at least warm, and its breath has rhythm, and that counts for something. One of the children coughs. Another one sighs in that mournful way only children can, like someone has taken away a toy they never had. You drift, not up, not down, but sideways, like the tide moving beneath ice. Time doesn't tick here. It leaks. Minutes melt into each other. You're not dreaming exactly. Not yet. But you're no longer here. You're somewhere else. Some strange borderland between awareness and nothing. You're both the bucket and the water. You're the splinter and the hand. You're part of the longhouse now. A squeaky floorboard with thoughts. The kind that remembers being stepped on and has opinions about it. Your nose itches again, faintly, but you've passed the point of action. The itch is distant, a problem for the version of yourself that still responds to discomfort with motion. That person is gone, replaced by someone softer, slower, someone who breathes more with each exhale than the one before. Your chest rises and falls like an old barn door, creaking at the hinges, but still doing its job. Outside, the wind rustles through thatch and trees. It carries the scent of wet soil, smoke, and damp sheep. You know this without knowing it, because your body catalogs every scent like a peasant ledger, poorly organized but incredibly thorough. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hoots once, as if to mark a changing hour. You don't care. Let it hoot. You have no interest in what time it is. Time is a luxury, like second helpings or socks without holes. Your fingers twitch once, possibly dreaming, possibly a spasm from being clenched for too many hours around a wooden spoon. The line between the two is thin now. You no longer question what your body is doing. You simply allow it. You lie still because anything else would require intention, and intention has quietly slipped away through a crack in the thatch. At some point, you become aware that your mouth has dried completely, and your lips have stuck together like two bits of old parchment. You consider licking them, but the effort outweighs the reward. The goat makes a satisfied grunt and shifts its weight, pressing into your shin more fully. The pressure is oddly reassuring, as if someone is reminding you that yes, you're real, and no, you're not alone. You respond with a soft grunt of your own, a sound that could mean anything. Yes, go away, or simply, I exist, but barely. The world outside shrinks. No more wind, no more owl, just the house and its sleepers, and the fire that has now sunk to its last ember. That ember still gives off a faint glow, enough to cast a dim orange curve across the wall, where smoke stains mingle with old cobwebs. You imagine their maps, routes to other lives. One leads to a warmer house. One leads to a slightly fuller bowl of stew. Another leads to the past, where you weren't yet sore in all the places you now call home. Your breath slows again. Your jaw slackens. Your feet twitch once more, then stop. Sleep, real sleep, finally sinks in. Not like mist, not like a lullaby, but like a sack of grain dropped from a cart. Heavy, undeniable, absolute. In this sleep, there are no dreams worth remembering. Only sensations that blur into each other. The scratch of straw, the warmth of the goat, the odd creak of the beam above your head that always sounds like it's threatening to fall, but never does. You are the sound of distant snoring. You are the smell of singed wool. You are, for the moment, gone. And still the house breathes. Still the night continues its slow, damp crawl toward morning. Still the weight of another day waits somewhere beyond the frost-kissed thatch, ready to lean on your shoulders the moment you stir. But for now, at last, you do not stir. You lie still beneath your lumpy, borrowed blanket, surrounded by the quiet grumble of sleeping kin, as sleep, ungraceful and unrelenting, holds you down like the most familiar burden. The coals tick once in the hearth, and the goat lets out a soft bleat in its sleep as the sky beyond the shutters begins to think, just think, about light. And somewhere, not far from dreaming, your body forgets what it was aching for.